When the stagecoach disappeared into the blizzard and left her standing alone in the frozen wasteland of Nevada territory, Evelyn Mercer knew she'd made a terrible mistake. The teaching job promised shelter and pay. It didn't mention the silent rancher who could barely look at her, the hostile children who didn't want her there, or the wolves circling outside every night. But by the time she understood what Red Hollow really was, turning back had become impossible. Stay with me until the end of this story, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this tale travels. The advertisement had been simple, almost suspiciously simple. Teacher wanted, remote cattle territory, room, board, $40 monthly, Nevada territory. Inquire Western Employment Bureau, Boston. Evelyn Mercer had stared at those words in the newspaper for 3 days before finally walking into that cramped office on Tremont Street. 3 days of sitting in her boarding house room, watching her savings dwindle to almost nothing, watching the respectable teaching positions go to women whose reputations hadn't been destroyed by circumstances beyond their control. That had been 6 weeks ago. Now stepping down from the stagecoach into ankle-deep snow under a gray January sky, Evelyn wondered if desperation had finally driven her insane. Red Hollow wasn't a town. It was barely even a settlement, a trading post, a half-collapsed livery stable, maybe a dozen rough buildings scattered along what someone had optimistically called a road. Beyond that, nothing but endless white plains stretching toward jagged mountains that looked like broken teeth against the horizon. The wind cut through her wool coat as if it were made of paper. "This is your stop, miss." The driver dropped her trunk into the snow without ceremony. He looked anxious to leave, his eyes scanning the empty street. "You sure someone's meeting you here?" Evelyn pulled her scarf tighter and tried to sound more confident than she felt. "The letter said, 'Letters don't mean much out here.'" He climbed back onto the coach, already gathering the reins. "You want to come back to Carson City? You say so now. We leave in 30 seconds. She should have said yes. Every instinct screamed at her to climb back into that coach and admit defeat. Return to Boston, face the whispers and the closed doors and the landlady's knowing looks, but at least be somewhere civilized, somewhere that made sense. But her purse held exactly $12.30. Not enough for the return fare, barely enough to survive another week in Carson City. "I'll be fine," Evelyn lied. The driver shrugged. He'd warned her. That was all his conscience required. The stagecoach lurched forward, and within seconds it had vanished into the white landscape, leaving her completely alone. The silence was absolute. No church bells, no street vendors, no rumble of wagon wheels or factory whistles, just the wind howling across the frozen plains like something wounded and angry. Evelyn stood beside her trunk and waited. The Employment Bureau had promised someone would meet her. She checked the watch pinned to her coat, nearly noon. Maybe they'd been delayed by the weather. Maybe... "You the teacher?" She spun around so fast she nearly lost her footing in the snow. A boy stood about 20 feet away, watching her with the wary expression of someone approaching a potentially dangerous animal. He couldn't have been more than 12, skinny and dark-haired, dressed in clothes that had seen too many winters. His hand rested on the rifle slung across his back with a casualness that said he knew exactly how to use it. Yes, Evelyn Mercer, from Boston." She tried to smile. The boy didn't smile back. "Luke Grayson." He jerked his chin toward her trunk. "That all you brought?" "I was told there would be suitable accommodations, and wagons this way." He turned and started walking without checking to see if she'd follow. Evelyn grabbed the handle of her trunk and tried to drag it through the snow. It barely moved. The boy, Luke, didn't look back. "Excuse me," she called, her voice sharper than intended. "I could use some help." Luke stopped, turned around slowly, looked at her trunk, then at her face, with an expression that wasn't quite contempt, but definitely wasn't respect. "You gonna make it about 3 miles dragging that thing?" "No, which is why I'm asking. So leave it. It contains all my possessions." "Then I guess you better figure it out." He continued walking. Evelyn stood there, hands shaking. Whether from cold or rage, she wasn't entirely sure. In Boston, even the most ill-mannered street children showed more courtesy than this. But she wasn't in Boston anymore. She took a deep breath, grabbed the trunk's handle with both hands, and hauled it forward through the snow. 6 feet. Stop. Breathe. 6 more feet. Her arms burned. Her feet were already going numb inside her completely inadequate boots. The boy had disappeared around a building. When she finally dragged her trunk around the corner, she found him waiting beside a rough wooden wagon hitched to 2 horses that looked as unfriendly as their handler. Luke was chewing on something, dried meat, maybe, and watching her struggle with an expression that might have been curiosity. "Stubborn," he said. Not quite an insult, maybe even a compliment. "Determined," Evelyn corrected, breathing hard. Luke almost smiled. Almost. Then he jumped down, grabbed her trunk like it weighed nothing, and tossed it into the wagon bed. "Get in." The wagon had no cushions, no springs. It was basically a wooden box on wheels, and every bump felt like a personal attack on her spine. Evelyn gripped the side to keep from being thrown out as they lurched forward. "How far to the school?" she asked, trying to make conversation. "Don't have one." She blinked. "I'm sorry? No school." "Not yet." Luke kept his eyes on the road, or what passed for a road. "You're supposed to build it." "I'm supposed to—" Evelyn felt ice forming in her stomach that had nothing to do with the weather. The advertisement said there was an established schoolhouse. Advertisements say lots of things. Then where exactly am I supposed to teach? House, I guess. That's what Pa figures. Your father hired me? Pa don't hire nobody. Luke's hands tightened on the reins. Mrs. Winters at the trading post put the advertisement in the papers back east. Bunch of families around here got kids need teaching. They're paying for it. I see. Evelyn didn't see it all, but asking more questions clearly wouldn't help. And your father agreed to house me? Didn't have much choice. We got the biggest place, and Ma's been gone 2 years, so there's a room. The way he said it, flat, matter of fact, like he'd repeated it so many times the emotion had been worn completely away, made Evelyn's throat tighten. I'm sorry about your mother. Luke's jaw clenched. Don't need sorry. They rode in silence after that. The landscape never changed. Just endless white plains, broken occasionally by dark shapes that might have been cattle or might have been rocks half buried in snow. No trees, no variation. Nothing to suggest that human beings had any business trying to survive here. You ever been outside Boston? Luke asked suddenly. I visited Hartford and Providence. Where's that? Connecticut, Rhode Island, back east. Long way from here. Yes. Why'd you come? Such a simple question, such an impossible answer. Because my father's business partner stole everything and disappeared, leaving us bankrupt. Because my father died of shame and grief 6 months later. Because my fiancée decided a woman with no dowry and a scandal attached to her name wasn't worth marrying after all. Because every teaching position in Boston went to women whose families still had money and reputations. Because I was 3 weeks from being homeless and working in a factory, and this was the only offer I received. I needed a change, Evelyn said quietly. Luke snorted. You got one. After nearly an hour, buildings appeared on the horizon. Evelyn felt relief flood through her. The main settlement, perhaps. Maybe Red Hollow was larger than she'd thought. But Luke drove right past the cluster of buildings without slowing. Wait, isn't that Jensen Place, not ours? How much farther? Another hour, maybe more if the snow picks up. Evelyn closed her eyes and tried not to cry. The sun was sliding toward the mountains when Luke finally turned the wagon off what could generously be called a road. Evelyn saw a house in the distance. Dark wood, 2 stories, smoke rising from the chimney, barn, several outbuildings, cattle moving slow and dark against the snow. It looked like every farm she'd ever imagined. Except farms in Massachusetts didn't exist in complete isolation, surrounded by emptiness that stretched to the edge of the world. Luke pulled the wagon to a stop near the porch. The front door didn't open. Pa's probably in the barn, Luke said, jumping down. You can wait here or come inside, don't matter. I'd prefer to meet your father first. Suit yourself. He headed toward the barn without another word, leaving Evelyn sitting in the wagon, wondering what exactly she was supposed to do. Everything about this felt wrong. The Employment Bureau had promised a professional arrangement, a boarding situation with a respectable family, proper introductions. This felt like being abandoned on someone's doorstep. She climbed down carefully, her legs stiff from the cold in the ride. The porch steps creaked under her weight. The front door was solid wood, painted dark green, with no window. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. What was the protocol here? She'd been hired, but by whom exactly? Did she knock? Let herself in? Wait outside until someone acknowledged her existence? The door opened. A little girl stood there, maybe 7 years old, with dark hair and crooked braids and eyes that matched her brother's. She stared up at Evelyn with an expression of pure wonder. Are you the teacher? Yes, my name is Evelyn Mercer. I'm Clara. The girl's face broke into a smile. Are you pretty? The question was so unexpected that Evelyn laughed despite herself. I'm not sure how to answer that. Mama was pretty. Luke said you probably wouldn't be, but I think you are. That's very kind. Evelyn smiled down at her. May I come in? Clara's smile faltered. I'm not supposed to let strangers in when Pa's not here. That's a good rule, but I'm going to be living here, so perhaps we could... You're living here? Clara's eyes went wide. Inside our house? That's what I was told. Is there somewhere else I should... Clara! The voice came from the direction of the barn. Deep, sharp. Not quite angry, but definitely not welcoming. Get back inside. The little girl disappeared instantly, the door slamming shut. Evelyn turned around. A man was walking toward the house with Luke trailing behind him. Tall, easily over 6 feet, broad shoulders, dark hair under a worn hat. Even from a distance, she could see the tension in the way he moved, like every step cost him something. He stopped at the base of the porch steps, looking up at her with eyes that were surprisingly blue against his sun-weathered face. Those eyes scanned her from head to foot in about 2 seconds, and whatever judgment he reached wasn't positive. You're the teacher. Not a question, a statement loaded with something that sounded like resignation. Evelyn Mercer, Mr. Grayson, I presume? Caleb. He glanced at Luke. Get her trunk. Already did. Put it in the wagon. Then put it in the spare room. Luke's expression suggested this was somehow Evelyn's fault, but he trudged toward the wagon without arguing. Caleb Grayson stood there, not speaking, not moving, just looking at her with an intensity that made Evelyn want to check if her buttons were properly fastened. I apologize for the confusion, she said, trying to fill the silence. The Employment Bureau wasn't entirely clear about the arrangements. I was under the impression there would be an established school and that I'd be boarding with a family, but if that's not... You'll stay here. Teach the kids. Yes, I understand that part, but $40 a month. Room and board included. Mr. Grayson. Caleb. Caleb. She forced herself to meet his eyes, even though everything about him screamed that he didn't want to be having this conversation. I appreciate the opportunity, but I'd like to understand exactly what's expected of me. Teach. He said it like the answer was obvious. Luke reads, but not great. Clara don't read at all. Jensen's got 3 kids need teaching. Henderson's got 4, couple other families. You teach them. Here? In your house? Don't have a school yet. Working on that. I see. And the curriculum? Do you have any preference for... Don't know anything about that. You're the teacher. He turned to go, clearly considering the conversation finished. Wait. Evelyn came down the steps, her frustration finally overriding her fear. Mr. Grayson, Caleb, I've traveled 2,000 miles based on an advertisement that was at best misleading. The least you can do is give me a proper explanation of the situation. He stopped, turned back slowly. His expression hadn't changed, but something in his eyes had, a flicker of what might have been surprise that she'd pushed back. What do you want to know? Everything. Why was the advertisement placed? Who exactly hired me? What are the living arrangements? What am I actually walking into here? Caleb looked at her for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter, but no warmer. Families around here got kids growing up without learning to read or write. My kids included. Mrs. Winters knew somebody back in Boston who runs that employment office. She put together money from families who wanted a teacher, sent the advertisement. You answered. That's it. And the living arrangements? Spare room upstairs, door locks. Clara's at the end of the hall. Luke's room is downstairs by the kitchen. My room's downstairs too. He paused. You'll have privacy. I wasn't suggesting... People will talk anyway. Can't stop that. But you'll have privacy. Evelyn felt heat rising to her face. Mr. Grayson, I hope you don't think I came here expecting... I don't think anything. I'm telling you how it is. His voice was flat, empty. You want the job or not? It wasn't really a question. They both knew she had nowhere else to go. Yes? Then come inside. Claire'll show you your room. Dinner's at 6. He walked away toward the barn without another word. Evelyn stood there in the snow, watching him go, and wondered if she'd just made the worst decision of her life. The spare room was small but clean, a narrow bed, a dresser with a cracked mirror, a window that looked out over endless white plains. The door had a lock, just like Caleb had said. Clara had bounced around showing Evelyn everything, her excitement almost painful to watch. This was Aunt Margaret's room when she visited, but she died last winter, so nobody uses it now. Do you have nice dresses? Mama had nice dresses, but Pa burned most of them after she died because he said keeping them hurt too much. Luke said you'd probably have fancy city dresses, do you? Evelyn had unpacked her 3 serviceable dresses, and one good dress that was no longer quite good enough for Boston society, while Clara sat on the bed asking questions faster than anyone could possibly answer them. Now, as evening approached, Evelyn stood at the window and watched the sun sink toward the mountains. The landscape turned gold, then orange, then deep purple. It was beautiful in a way that made her chest ache. A knock at the door made her turn. Dinner! Luke's voice, muffled through the wood. The kitchen was warm and smelled like meat and bread. A large table dominated the room, scarred and worn but solid. Caleb stood at the stove, moving efficiently despite his size, dishing food onto plates. He cooked. Evelyn hadn't expected that. Sit. He nodded toward the table without looking at her. Clara patted the chair next to her eagerly. Luke took the seat farthest from Evelyn. Caleb brought the plates over, roasted meat, potatoes, beans, and sat at the head of the table. For several minutes, nobody spoke. They just ate. Evelyn tried the meat tentatively. It was better than she'd expected, actually good. You cook very well, she offered. Caleb's fork paused for half a second. Thanks. More silence. Clara kicked her feet under the table, glancing between her father and Evelyn like she was waiting for something to happen. Luke ate steadily, his eyes on his plate. So, Evelyn tried again, when should I start teaching? Tomorrow, Caleb said. Jensen will bring his kids over in the morning. Henderson probably the day after. I'll need supplies, books, slates, paper. Trading Post has some. Make a list. Luke will take you tomorrow before the other kids show up. Thank you. Silence again. This was unbearable. Evelyn had sat through awkward dinners before, her father's business associates, her fiancé's disapproving mother, but this was different. This wasn't polite coldness. This was just nothing. Like she wasn't even there. Your ranch is quite large, she tried. Big enough. How many cattle do you run? Enough. The landscape is very different from Boston. Imagine so. Clara made a small, frustrated noise. Pa, you're supposed to talk to her. That's what people do at dinner. I am talking to her. No, you're being mean. Clara. Caleb's voice didn't rise, but something in it made the little girl's mouth snap shut. Mind yourself. Luke smirked into his plate. Evelyn felt her face flush. She'd been dismissed, judged, and found wanting by a 12-year-old boy, a rancher who could barely look at her, and apparently the entire situation. Fine. If they wanted silence, she could give them silence. She finished her meal without another word. I'll clean up, Caleb said when the plates were empty. Clara, get ready for bed. But, now. Clara trudged out, shooting Evelyn an apologetic look. Luke followed without being asked, leaving Evelyn alone with Caleb in the kitchen. She started gathering plates. Caleb took them from her hands. I can help, Evelyn said. Don't need help. It's the least I can do after. Go to your room, Miss Mercer. The formality stung worse than his earlier bluntness. She'd been reduced to Miss Mercer again, a stranger, an employee, someone who didn't belong here and never would. Of course. Evelyn kept her voice steady. Good night, Mr. Grayson. She made it to her room before the tears started. Sleep didn't come easily that first night. The bed was comfortable enough, but every sound was wrong. Wind howling against the house, cattle lowing in the distance, something, wolves maybe, making sounds that raised every hair on her arms. And beneath it all, silence. Real silence. The kind that didn't exist in Boston. No carriages, no neighbors, no distant sounds of a city that never quite slept. Just emptiness, pressing in from all sides. She must have dozed eventually because she woke to pale light coming through the window and the smell of coffee. When Evelyn came downstairs, she found Caleb at the stove again, Clara at the table eating porridge, and no sign of Luke. Morning. Caleb didn't look up from the pan he was tending. Food's ready. Thank you. Evelyn poured herself coffee from the pot on the table. It was strong enough to strip paint. She tried not to cough. Too strong? It's fine. You're a terrible liar. Was that almost humor in his voice? Evelyn looked up, but his expression hadn't changed. Clara giggled. Pa makes coffee strong enough to wake up dead people. Clara. But Caleb's tone was softer when he spoke to his daughter, almost gentle. What did I say about repeating things you hear from the ranch hands? That they're not proper for little girls. Clara rolled her eyes dramatically. But it's true about the coffee. Evelyn hid her smile behind her cup. Luke appeared from outside, stamping snow off his boots. Horses are fed. You want me to take her to the trading post now? After breakfast. Might snow later. Then you better get back before it does. Luke grabbed bread and meat, eating standing up, his rifle already strapped to his back. Everything about him radiated impatience and barely controlled energy. How old are you, Luke? Evelyn asked. 12? And you handle the horses yourself? Been doing it since I was 8. That's quite young. His eyes flashed. I can do the work. I didn't mean to suggest, yeah, you did. Luke swallowed the last of his food. That's what city people do. Act like we don't know nothing out here. Luke, Caleb said quietly. Enough. It's true, Pa. She's going to try to teach me things I already know and treat me like I'm stupid because I don't talk like people in Boston. I would never, Evelyn started. You already are. Luke grabbed his hat. I'll get the wagon ready. He slammed out the door. Evelyn sat frozen, humiliation burning through her. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to offend him. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Luke's ma died helping birth a stillborn baby. He found her, rode 5 miles in a blizzard to get me from the north pasture. By the time we got back, she'd been gone for hours. The words hit Evelyn like a physical blow. He's been angry ever since, Caleb continued, his voice still that same flat monotone. Not at you, at everything. Don't take it personal. I had no idea. No reason you would. Caleb brought food to the table. Eggs, bacon, more bread. But out here, people grow up fast or they don't grow up at all. Luke's doing the work of a man. He's earned the right to be treated like one. It wasn't quite a reprimand, but it wasn't not a reprimand either. Evelyn ate her breakfast in silence, feeling more out of place with every passing minute. Dad. The trading post was exactly as depressing as Evelyn had expected. A single large room crammed with supplies, smelling of leather and tobacco and unwashed bodies. Mrs. Winters turned out to be a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who looked Evelyn up and down with the same assessing expression Luke had used. So, you're the teacher? Yes, ma'am. You look younger than I expected. I'm 25. Mrs. Winters didn't sound impressed. Got teaching experience? 3 years at a girls' academy in Boston. This ain't Boston, girl. These kids are half wild. Some of them never been inside a proper building, let alone a classroom. I understand. Do you? Mrs. Winters leaned against the counter. Because I'm the one who placed that advertisement, and I'm the one who's going to hear about it if you run back east after a week. I have no intention of... They all say that. Mrs. Winters waved a dismissive hand. Last teacher we had lasted 3 days. Couldn't handle the isolation. Before that, we had a man lasted 2 weeks before the Jensen boys broke his nose. You think you're tougher than that? Evelyn lifted her chin. I survived the journey here. I'll survive teaching. We'll see. But something in Mrs. Winters' expression softened slightly. You need supplies? Books, slates, chalk, paper if you have it. Got most of that, it'll cost. I was told the families were providing... They're providing your pay and your room. Supplies come out of your pocket unless you want to wait for the next collection, which won't happen until spring. Of course. Evelyn calculated quickly. She had $12. Supplies would probably cost at least $3. I'll take what I can afford. Luke, who'd been leaning against the wall looking bored, suddenly spoke up. Put it on the Grayson account. Luke, Evelyn started. Pa said to get what you need. That means put it on the account. Mrs. Winters raised an eyebrow. Caleb approves this? He said, get what she needs. Mrs. Winters studied Luke, then Evelyn, with an expression that suggested she was calculating something more than numbers. All right, but you tell your pa I'm keeping track. Yes, ma'am. They left with basic supplies. Enough to start, at least. The whole transaction had taken maybe 20 minutes, but Evelyn felt exhausted. Every interaction here required decoding. Every simple task came with unspoken rules she didn't understand. On the ride back, Luke was quiet. Not hostile exactly, just distant. Thank you, Evelyn said finally, for the supplies. Luke shrugged. Pa would have done it anyway. Still, I appreciate it. You're going to teach Clara. It wasn't a question. Make her read good? As well as I can. She's smart, smarter than me. I doubt that. It's true. Luke's hands tightened on the reins. Ma used to read to her every night. Clara remembers all the stories. I can't remember things like that. Different people learn differently. That doesn't make you less intelligent. Luke didn't respond, but something in his posture relaxed slightly. They were almost home when he spoke again. Pa don't mean to be cold. He don't know how to talk to people anymore. After Ma died, it's like he forgot how. I understand. Do you? Luke glanced at her. Because most people say they understand, but they don't really. They just say it to be nice. Evelyn thought about her father, about watching him fade away after the scandal, withdrawing into silence until even she couldn't reach him. About the morning she'd found him dead in his chair, a letter from his former partner crumpled in his hand. I understand, she said quietly. Luke studied her face for a moment, then nodded. Okay. It was the first real conversation they'd had. The Jensen children arrived the next morning. 3 boys ranging from 6 to 10, all with the same red hair and suspicious expressions. They tracked Snow through the house, refused to sit at the table Evelyn had prepared, and responded to every question with either silence or barely concealed laughter. Clara sat perfectly still, desperate to impress the teacher. Luke didn't sit at all. He leaned against the wall, arms crossed, watching everything with that same wary expression. Good morning, Evelyn began, trying to project confidence she absolutely didn't feel. My name is Miss Mercer, and I'll be, You really from Boston? The oldest Jensen boy interrupted. Yes, Why'd you come here? To teach. But why here? This place is nothing. The other boys snickered. That's enough, Luke said quietly from the wall. Let her talk. The boys shut up instantly. Apparently Luke had already established some kind of pecking order. Evelyn took a breath. I came here because children everywhere deserve an education, regardless of where they live. Now, I'd like to assess your current skills. Can each of you write your name? Blank stares. On the slates I've provided, just your name. The youngest Jensen boy picked up the chalk and stared at it like it might bite him. Have you used chalk before? Evelyn asked gently. No, ma'am. That's all right. Watch. She wrote her own name on the large slate she'd propped on the table. See? You try. It took 45 minutes to get through that simple exercise. The oldest boy could write his name, poorly. The middle one got 2 letters. The youngest couldn't write at all, but drew a surprisingly good picture of a horse. Clara wrote her name perfectly, then looked at Evelyn with such hope that it physically hurt. Luke never moved from the wall. When the Jensen boys finally left, loud, chaotic, tracking more snow everywhere, Evelyn sank into a chair and put her head in her hands. That bad? Luke asked. They don't know anything. Not numbers, not letters, not... She stopped herself. I'm sorry, that came out wrong. No, you're right, they don't. Luke pushed off from the wall. Nobody's ever taught them. How are they supposed to know? They're not. Which is why I'm here. Evelyn looked up at him. I've never taught children who had no foundation at all. No exposure to books or writing or even basic concepts. I don't know how to start. Start where they are. Luke headed toward the door. Not where you think they should be. He was gone before Evelyn could respond. Clara was still sitting at the table, her slate in front of her, waiting. "Would you like to continue?" Evelyn asked. Clara nodded eagerly. They worked for 2 more hours. Clara was bright, focused, hungry to learn in a way that reminded Evelyn painfully of herself at that age. By the time they finished, the little girl could write the alphabet and was starting to sound out simple words. "You're an excellent student," Evelyn said. Clara beamed. "Really?" "Really. Mama said I was smart, but Pa never says it. I'm sure your father thinks you're very intelligent. Pa don't say much of anything." Clara's smile faded slightly. "Luke says he used to talk more. Before. But I don't remember. Before. Everything in this house was defined by that word." "Well," Evelyn said carefully, "some people express themselves through actions rather than words." "What kind of actions?" "Oh, making sure you have food and a warm house, and that's just regular stuff." Evelyn didn't know how to explain that regular stuff was love when you didn't know how to say the words. That evening, Caleb came in from outside as Evelyn was helping Clara with more writing practice. He paused in the doorway, taking in the scene. His daughter bent over a slate, Evelyn leaning close to point out letter formations. "She's doing very well," Evelyn said, looking up. Caleb nodded, didn't speak, just hung up his coat and went to start dinner. But later, when Clara showed him the alphabet she'd written, Evelyn saw his hand rest briefly on his daughter's head. Just for a second. Clara leaned into the touch like she was starving for it. Then Caleb went back to cooking, and the moment was over. Evelyn was starting to understand that in this house, everything important happened in the spaces between words. Mbas. The next week brought more children. The Henderson kids, 4 of them, ranging from 5 to 13, arrived Tuesday. The oldest girl was surly and resentful, convinced she was too old for school. The youngest boy cried the entire first day. Wednesday brought 2 children from a ranch Evelyn hadn't even known existed, so far out that their father apologized for their irregular attendance. By Thursday, Evelyn was teaching 9 children with wildly different skill levels in a dining room that wasn't designed for it, with supplies that were barely adequate, following a curriculum she was inventing hour by hour. It was chaos. It was also, somehow, working. The Jensen boys stopped tracking mud everywhere when Evelyn instituted a rule that Boots stayed by the door. The Henderson girls' resentment cracked when Evelyn asked her to help teach the younger children their letters. Clara flourished with the attention and structure. Even Luke started sitting at the table instead of leaning against the wall. Caleb watched it all from a distance. He never interfered, never commented. But Evelyn noticed things. The table in the dining room was suddenly at a better height for children. A shelf appeared on the wall for books. Fresh firewood showed up outside her door every morning before she woke up. He was helping. In his way. Friday evening, after the last children had left and Clara was in bed, Evelyn found Caleb outside on the porch despite the cold. "Thank you," she said. He turned slightly. "For what?" "The table, the shelf, the firewood. Just doing what needs doing." "Still." She wrapped her arms around herself against the wind. "I appreciate it." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was even rougher than usual. "You're good with them, the kids." It was the first real compliment he'd given her. "Thank you," Evelyn said softly. "Luke reads better already. I can tell. He's very bright. He just needs confidence. He needs someone who doesn't give up on him." Caleb looked out at the dark plains. Most people give up. They see a kid who's rough around the edges and they stop trying. "I won't give up on him." "You say that now." "I mean it." Caleb turned to look at her fully for the first time since she'd arrived. His eyes were shadowed in the dim light from the window, but she could feel the weight of his stare. "Why'd you really come here, Net?" he asked. "A woman like you, educated, from a good family. You don't come to Red Hollow unless you're running from something." Evelyn's breath caught. "That's a very personal question." "You're living in my house, teaching my kids. I figure I've got a right to know who you are." He had a point. "My father's business partner stole everything we had," Evelyn heard herself say. "Father died of the shame. My engagement was broken. I couldn't get a teaching position in Boston because the scandal made me unmarriageable and therefore unfit to teach young ladies. So yes, I was running. Is that what you wanted to hear?" Caleb's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes might have been understanding. "We're all running from something out here," he said quietly. "That's why most people come to places like this. Running or hiding or trying to forget." "What are you running from?" "I'm not running." His voice went flat again. "I'm just trying to survive what I can't leave behind." He went back inside, leaving Evelyn alone on the porch with the wind and the stars and the slowly crystallizing understanding that everyone in this house was broken in different ways. Maybe that was why they could stand to live together. The first real snow came Sunday night. Evelyn woke to a world completely white. Snow covered everything: the barn, the outbuildings, the cattle barely visible as dark shapes against the endless white. It was beautiful and terrible. Downstairs, Caleb was already up, drinking coffee and staring out the window with an expression that said this complicated everything. "Will the children be able to come tomorrow?" Evelyn asked. "No. Roads will be impossible." "How long?" "Depends on how much we get. Could be days. Could be weeks." Weeks. Trapped in this house with a man who barely spoke and children who were just starting to trust her. Evelyn poured herself coffee and tried not to panic. The day passed slowly. Caleb went out to check the cattle and didn't come back for hours. Luke helped him, coming in only to warm up before heading back out. Clara stayed inside with Evelyn, restless and bored. By evening, the snow was still falling. "We'll need to ration food," Caleb said at dinner. "Don't know how long we'll be snowed in." "Do you have enough supplies?" Evelyn asked. "Should, if we're careful." That night, Evelyn lay in bed listening to the wind howl and tried to remember why she'd thought coming here was a good idea. The answer wouldn't come. By morning, the world outside had disappeared entirely. Nothing but white in every direction, the mountains invisible, the barn barely a shadow. Caleb came in covered with snow, his face red with cold. "Lost 3 head, he said shortly. "Probably more." "What can I do to help?" Evelyn asked. "Stay inside, keep the fires going, make sure Clara doesn't go out." He was gone again before she could respond. The day stretched endlessly. Clara grew clingy, frightened by the storm and her father's absence. Evelyn read to her, taught her songs from Boston, tried to keep her distracted. Luke came in briefly around noon, grabbed food, and left without speaking. By evening, Evelyn was starting to worry. Caleb had been out there for hours. The temperature was dropping. The wind sounded like it might tear the house apart. "Where's Pa?" Clara asked for the 10th time. "He'll be back soon." "What if he's not?" "He will be." But Evelyn was wondering the same thing. When the door finally opened near midnight, Caleb practically fell inside. He was covered in ice, his face white with cold, his hand shaking so badly he couldn't unfasten his coat. Evelyn rushed over. "Clara, get blankets from the downstairs closet. Luke, start a fire in the stove." "I'm fine," Caleb managed through chattering teeth. "You're not fine. Sit." She pushed him toward a chair. For once, he didn't argue. Evelyn got his coat off, then his boots. His hands were bright red, his fingers clumsy. Frostbite, maybe. She grabbed them and started rubbing circulation back into them. "You can't go back out there," she said. "Have to. Cattle will survive or they won't. You going back out in this condition won't help them." "You don't understand. I understand that you're half frozen and exhausted and you're no good to anyone dead." Their eyes met. Caleb looked like he wanted to argue, but he was shaking too hard to manage it. Clara appeared with blankets. Luke had the fire going. Between all of them, they got Caleb warm, fed, and eventually convinced to sleep. But as Evelyn lay in her bed later, listening to the storm rage outside, she realized something had shifted. For the first time since arriving, she'd stopped being a guest in this house. She'd become part of it, whether she wanted to be or not. The storm lasted 4 days. 4 days of wind that screamed like something dying, snow that piled against the windows until the world outside disappeared completely, and cold that crept through every crack in the house, no matter how many fires they kept burning. Caleb recovered from that first night, though Evelyn caught him flexing his fingers sometimes like they still didn't quite work right. He didn't thank her for stopping him from going back out. Didn't acknowledge what had happened at all. Just went back to his usual silence, though something in the way he looked at her had changed. Less like she was an unwelcome stranger, more like she was just there. It wasn't much, but it was something. By the 3rd day, they were all getting restless. Clara grew whiny and clingy. Luke paced like a caged animal. Even Caleb's silence felt heavier, weighted with frustration at being trapped inside. Evelyn tried to maintain some structure. Morning lessons with Clara at the kitchen table, afternoon reading time, evening meals that felt less awkward than they had that first week, though conversation still came in fragments. Pass the salt. Clara, elbows off the table. How much firewood we got left? Enough. On the fourth morning, Evelyn woke to silence. Real silence. The wind had stopped. She dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Caleb already outside. Through the window, she could see him standing in snow that came past his knees, surveying the damage with Luke beside him. When they came back in an hour later, Caleb's expression was grim. Lost 12 head. Maybe more buried out there we can't see yet. Evelyn had no idea if that was catastrophic or manageable. I'm sorry. Part of ranching. He poured coffee with hands that were steadier now. Jensen lost half his herd in a storm like this 3 years back. Never recovered. Had to sell out. Will you, We'll be fine. Got enough cattle to make it through. But it's going to be a lean year. Luke sat at the table, his face tight with worry that made him look far older than 12. We should check the north pasture. Might be some took shelter in the ravine. After breakfast. Need to dig out the barn first. I can help with that, Evelyn said. Both of them looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. I'm serious. You need extra hands, and I'm capable of... No. Caleb's voice was flat, final. Why not? Because you'll freeze or hurt yourself, or both, and then I'll have that to deal with on top of everything else. The dismissal stung more than it should have. I'm not made of glass, Mr. Grayson. Didn't say you were. But you don't know what you're doing out there, and I don't have time to teach you. Then I'll learn by watching. No. You don't get to tell me so... Yes, I do. This is my ranch. Caleb met her eyes with an intensity that stopped her mid-sentence. You want to help? Keep Clara inside and safe. Keep the fires going. Make sure there's hot food when we come back in. That's help. He was gone before she could argue further. Evelyn stood there, shaking with anger and humiliation. Being reduced to housekeeping when there was real work to be done, when they clearly needed every available hand. As if she was some delicate city woman who'd shatter at the first sign of real labor. He don't mean it like it sounds. Luke was pulling on his boots, not looking at her. It's just, Ma tried to help once during a bad storm. Got turned around in the snow between the house and the barn. Couldn't see anything. We found her 3 hours later, nearly frozen to death. She was pregnant with the baby that... He stopped. Anyway, Pa's got reasons. The anger drained out of Evelyn like water from a broken cup. I didn't know. Most people don't. Luke grabbed his coat. He's trying to keep you alive, Miss Mercer. That's all. After they left, Evelyn stood at the window and watched two dark figures moving through the white landscape, digging, hauling, working with the kind of relentless determination that frontier survival demanded. Clara appeared at her elbow. Are you mad at Pa? No, sweetheart, just frustrated. That's what Luke says when he's mad but don't want to admit it. Evelyn couldn't help smiling. You're very observant. Mama used to say that. Clara's voice went quiet. She said I noticed things other people missed. That's a good quality. Sometimes. Clara pressed her face against the cold window. Sometimes I wish I didn't notice so much. Like how Pa stops breathing sometimes when he walks past their room. Or how Luke cries at night but pretends he don't. Noticing just makes everything hurt more. Evelyn pulled the little girl close, this child who'd been forced to grow up too fast, who carried grief that would have broken most adults. Your mother was right about you being special, Evelyn said softly, and someday, noticing things will be a gift instead of a burden. I promise. Clara leaned into her. Will you stay? Even when the snow melts and you could leave? The question hit harder than Evelyn expected. Would she stay? Should she? Every practical instinct said this place was impossible, too isolated, too harsh, too full of people who didn't want her here. But Clara was looking up at her with desperate hope. And outside, two figures were fighting the frontier with nothing but stubborn will in each other. I'll stay, Evelyn heard herself say, as long as you need me. The roads opened 3 days later. The first family to arrive was the Jensens, and they brought news that spread through Red Hollow faster than the blizzard had come. Mary Henderson was dead, caught pneumonia during the storm, gone within 2 days, leaving 4 children and a husband who hadn't spoken since they buried her in frozen ground. Mrs. Winters appeared at the Grayson Ranch that afternoon, her face carved from stone. "We're taking up a collection. Henderson's got no family, and those kids need care until he can manage again." "How much?" Caleb reached for the tin where he kept cash. "Much as folks can spare. And we need someone to go out there, make sure those children are fed and warm. No one wants to... Well, Henderson's not in a state for company." Evelyn stepped forward before she could think better of it. "I'll go." Mrs. Winters looked skeptical. "You ever dealt with fresh grief, girl?" "Yes." Evelyn thought of her father's empty eyes in those final months, the way he'd stopped seeing her entirely, lost somewhere she couldn't follow. "I have. Henderson Ranch is 6 miles out. You'd have to stay overnight, maybe longer." "I can manage." Caleb was watching her with an unreadable expression. "Luke can drive you tomorrow morning. I'll send supplies." That night, Evelyn packed a bag while Clara sat on the bed looking miserable. "I don't want you to go." "I'll be back in a few days." "But what if something happens? What if you don't come back like Mama didn't come back?" Evelyn sat beside her and took her small hands. "Nothing's going to happen to me. I promise." "You can't promise that. Nobody can." The child was right, of course. Out here, death came quick and without warning. Storms, disease, accidents. The frontier didn't care about promises. "You're right," Evelyn said honestly. "I can't promise nothing will happen. But I can promise I'll do everything possible to come back to you. Is that enough?" Clara thought about it, then nodded slowly. "Will you teach me more reading when you get back?" "Absolutely." "Can we read the book about the princess? The one Mama used to read?" Evelyn had found that book on a shelf in Clara's room, a fairy tale collection, worn soft from repeated readings. "We can read whatever you want." That seemed to satisfy her. Clara hugged Evelyn tightly, then ran off to find Luke. Evelyn continued packing, trying to ignore the knot of anxiety in her stomach. 6 miles didn't sound like much. But she'd learned enough about the frontier to know that distance here wasn't measured in miles. It was measured in what could go wrong between one place and another. A knock at her door. When she opened it, Caleb stood there, holding something wrapped in cloth. "Take this." He handed it to her. Evelyn unwrapped it carefully. A revolver, small but heavy in her hand. "I don't know how to use this." "Luke will show you in the morning. Basic stuff. How to load it, how to aim, how not to shoot yourself." Caleb's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was explaining how to use a cooking pot. "Probably won't need it, but better to have it." "What would I need it for?" "Wolves. Maybe coyotes. Probably nothing." He paused. "Henderson's not himself right now. He won't hurt you, but he might scare you. This is just in case." The unspoken meaning was clear, in case Henderson's grief had turned him dangerous. "Thank you," Evelyn said quietly. Caleb nodded and turned to go, then stopped. "What you're doing, going out there when you don't have to, that's decent of you." It was the closest thing to praise he'd ever given her. Someone has to help. Most people wouldn't. I'm not most people. Something that might have been almost a smile crossed his face. "No, you're not." He left her standing there, holding the gun, wondering what exactly she'd gotten herself into. The Henderson Ranch was smaller than the Graysons, and even from a distance, Evelyn could feel the wrongness of it. No smoke from the chimney despite the cold, no sounds of animals or children, just silence and the kind of stillness that meant something had broken and nobody knew how to fix it. Luke pulled the wagon to a stop but didn't get down. "You sure about this?" "No, but I'm doing it anyway. Pa says Henderson was a good man before, but losing your wife does things to people." Luke's voice carried weight that no 12-year-old should have. "If things feel wrong, you come right back out. Don't try to fix it all yourself." "I'll be careful." "You say that, but city people don't always know when to be scared." Evelyn climbed down from the wagon, supplies in hand, revolver heavy in her coat pocket. "I'm learning." The front door wasn't locked. Inside, the house was dark and cold and smelled like despair. 4 children sat at a table in the kitchen, the same 4 who'd been coming to lessons. They looked up at her with hollow eyes. The oldest girl, Sarah, spoke first. Papa's in the bedroom. He won't come out. When did he last eat? Don't know. Yesterday, maybe? And you? We had bread this morning. There's not much else. Evelyn set down her supplies and got to work. First, the fire. Then she inventoried what food they had, almost nothing, and started a simple stew with what she'd brought. The children watched her with a wariness that made her heart ache. Is Papa going to die too? The youngest boy asked. No, sweetheart. He's just very sad right now. Mama was sad sometimes, but she didn't stop taking care of us. Evelyn had no answer for that. What could she say? That grief affected people differently? That their father was drowning in loss and couldn't see them through it? That sometimes adults failed the people who needed them most? Instead, she fed them, got them warm, read to them from a book she'd brought until their eyes started closing. After they'd fallen asleep, Evelyn approached the closed bedroom door. Mr. Henderson, my name is Evelyn Mercer. I'm the teacher. I've brought food and supplies. Silence. Your children are worried about you. More silence. I'm going to leave a plate outside your door. Please eat something. She waited. Nothing. Evelyn left the food and went back to the kitchen. She'd sleep in a chair by the fire, keep watch over these children who'd already lost too much. Sometime after midnight, she heard the bedroom door open. Footsteps. The sound of a plate being taken. Then the door closing again. It wasn't much, but it was something. She stayed for 3 days. 3 days of coaxing Henderson back to life one small step at a time. First, getting him to eat. Then to come out of the bedroom for a few minutes. Then to sit with his children while Evelyn made dinner. He didn't speak. Barely looked at anyone. But he was there, physically present, even if the rest of him was somewhere else entirely. On the 3rd day, as Evelyn prepared to leave, Henderson finally met her eyes. Thank you. His voice was rough from disuse. I don't know how to... You don't have to explain. The kids need you to survive, that's all. Just keep surviving, one day at a time, and eventually it'll get easier. Does it get easier? Evelyn thought about her father, about the empty months after he'd died when breathing had felt like too much effort. Not easier, just different. The grief becomes part of you instead of all of you. Henderson nodded slowly. Mary would have liked you. She was always saying we needed a proper teacher. Then I'll make sure your children learn. That's one thing I can do. And when Luke came to pick her up, the Henderson children stood on the porch waving. Sarah was holding her father's hand. It was a small thing, but small things mattered out here. On the ride back, Luke was quiet for a long time. Then, you did good. I just made sure they didn't starve. You did more than that. You made Henderson come back. He struggled for words. After Ma died, I kept waiting for someone to make Pa come back. Nobody ever did. He had to do it himself, and it took forever. But you got Henderson started. That matters. Evelyn looked at this boy who'd seen too much, understood too much. Your father did come back, though. Maybe not all the way, but he's here. He takes care of you and Clara. Taking care and being here ain't the same thing. Luke's hands tightened on the reins. You can keep people alive without actually being alive yourself. The observation was so painfully accurate that Evelyn didn't know how to respond. When they got back to the ranch, Caleb was working in the barn. He came out when he heard the wagon, his eyes scanning Evelyn quickly, checking for injury, she realized. How was it? Difficult, but I think they'll be all right. Henderson? Getting there, Caleb nodded. You look exhausted. Go rest. It should have felt patronizing. Instead, it felt like care. Inside, Clara launched herself at Evelyn with such force they nearly fell over. You came back. I knew you would, but Luke said maybe you wouldn't, and I was scared and... Hey, slow down. Evelyn hugged her tight. I promised I'd come back, didn't I? Yes, but sometimes promises don't matter when bad things happen. Well, this time the promise held. Now, what do you say we continue that story about the princess? Clara's face lit up. Really? Really? They spent the evening reading together while Luke pretended not to listen from across the room, and Caleb cooked dinner with an expression that might have been contentment. Later, after the children were asleep, Evelyn found herself on the porch again. The cold bit at her face, but the stars were so bright they almost hurt to look at. Caleb came out a few minutes later, 2 cups of coffee in his hands. He offered her one without speaking. They stood in silence, drinking terrible coffee and watching the night. "You could have gotten hurt out there," Caleb said finally. "Or sick. Henderson could have... I don't know. Things could have gone wrong. But they didn't. This time." "Are you trying to say I shouldn't have gone?" "No." He took a long drink. "I'm saying I'm glad you came back." Evelyn turned to look at him, but he was staring straight ahead, his profile sharp against the dark. "The kids missed you," he added. "Clara especially." "Just the kids?" The question came out before she could stop it. Bold, inappropriate, the kind of thing a proper Boston lady would never say to her employer. But Evelyn was tired of being proper. Caleb's jaw worked like he was trying to find words. Finally, "No, not just the kids." It wasn't a declaration, barely even an admission, but it made Evelyn's heart beat faster anyway. "I missed being here too," she said quietly. They stood there a moment longer, not looking at each other, both pretending the conversation hadn't just shifted into dangerous territory. Then Caleb cleared his throat. "Better get inside. Getting colder." He left. Evelyn stayed a few minutes more, watching her breath turn to fog and trying to understand what had just happened. Teaching resumed the following week. The children who'd missed lessons during the storm came back eager to learn, even the Jensen boys who'd been so resistant at first. Word had spread about Evelyn staying with the Hendersons. The town's perception of her shifted. She wasn't just the city teacher anymore. She was someone who'd proven herself, who understood that survival out here meant helping each other. Mrs. Winters even smiled at her when Evelyn came to the trading post. "Heard you did right by the Henderson family." "I just did what needed doing." "That's all anyone can do out here, but most don't." Mrs. Winters leaned across the counter. "You're tougher than you look, girl. I'll admit I had my doubts." "You weren't alone in that." "No, but you proved us wrong." She paused. "How are things at the Grayson place?" There was weight behind the question that Evelyn didn't quite understand. "Fine. Why?" "Just wondering. People talk, you know. Young woman living with a widower, even with the children there, tongues wag." Heat rose to Evelyn's face. "It's a professional arrangement." "I'm sure it is. Just telling you what's being said." Mrs. Winters' expression softened slightly. "Caleb Grayson's a good man. He don't deserve the grief people give him. And you seem like a decent woman. Just be careful. Out here, reputation matters, especially for women." After she left, Evelyn walked back to where Luke was waiting with the wagon, Mrs. Winters' words echoing in her head. People were talking. Of course they were. She should have expected it, but the thought of gossip reducing what was happening at the Grayson Ranch to something sordid made her furious. There was nothing improper about the arrangement. Caleb barely spoke to her. They lived in the same house out of necessity, not desire. Except that wasn't entirely true anymore, was it? She thought about their conversation on the porch. The way he'd looked at her when she'd returned from the Hendersons. The coffee he'd brought her without being asked. Small things. But small things mattered. "Miss Mercer?" Luke was watching her with concern. "You all right?" "Yes, just thinking." "About what Mrs. Winters said?" Evelyn looked at him sharply. "You heard that?" "I wasn't trying to, but yeah." Luke shifted uncomfortably. "People have been talking since you arrived. Pa knows. He don't care what they say." "Maybe he should care." "Why?" "Caring what people think don't change nothing. We need a teacher. You're a good teacher. That's all that matters." "It's not that simple." "Why not?" "Because reputation destroyed lives. Because gossip could turn a professional arrangement into something shameful. Because Evelyn had already lost everything once to scandal, and she couldn't survive it happening again. But looking at Luke's honest, confused face, she couldn't explain all that. "You're right," she said instead. "It shouldn't matter." That night at dinner, Caleb was quieter than usual. Clara chattered about her lessons, Luke complained about a cow that kept breaking through fences, and Evelyn pushed food around her plate without eating much. After the children went to bed, Caleb stopped her in the kitchen. "Something's wrong." "I'm fine." "You're a terrible liar, remember?" Despite everything, Evelyn almost smiled. "Mrs. Winters mentioned that people are talking about me living here." Caleb's expression hardened. "What people say doesn't..." It matters, Caleb. You might not care, but I've had my reputation destroyed before. I know what it costs. This isn't Boston. No, it's worse. In Boston, there were hundreds of people. Here, there's maybe 50, and they all know each other's business. If they decide I'm... She couldn't finish the sentence. If they decide you're what? Living improperly? Let them think it. Caleb's voice was rough. You're the best thing that's happened to this valley in years. Anyone with sense knows that. And the ones without sense? Don't matter. They do to me. Caleb looked at her for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was quieter. What do you want me to do? Tell you to leave? Because I won't. We need you. The kids need you. I know. Then what? I don't know. Evelyn felt tears threatening and fought them back. I just needed you to know that it's not easy. Being here. Dealing with the gossip and the isolation and trying to figure out how to survive in a place that's nothing like home. You think I don't know that? Something raw entered Caleb's voice. You think I don't see how hard you're trying, how much you've given up to be here? Then why do you make it so difficult? What? You barely speak to me. You treat me like I'm made of glass one minute and ignore me the next. I never know where I stand with you. The words tumbled out before she could stop them. Months of frustration and confusion and something else she didn't want to name. Caleb stared at her. You want to know where you stand? Yes. You're the first person I've let into this house since my wife died. The first person I've trusted with my children. The first person I've... He stopped. Took a breath. I don't know how to do this. Talk to people. Be around people. Mary was the one who knew how to connect. I just worked and kept quiet and let her handle everything else. When she died, I forgot how to be anything but alone. The confession hit Evelyn like a physical blow. You're not alone anymore, she said softly. No. And that terrifies me. They stood there in the kitchen, the lamplight casting shadows on the walls, the house creaking around them in the wind. It terrifies me too, Evelyn admitted. Being here, caring about you and the children, feeling like maybe I found something I didn't know I was looking for. What did you find? I don't know yet, but it feels like it might be important. Caleb stepped closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of him, smell the smoke and leather, and something else that was just him. People are going to talk, he said. No matter what we do, we could sleep in separate buildings, and they'd still make up stories. I know. So maybe... He struggled with the words. Maybe we stop worrying about what they think and just figure out what we want. And what do you want? The question hung between them. Caleb's hand lifted, hovering near her face like he wanted to touch her but wasn't sure he was allowed. I want you to stay, not just because the kids need a teacher, because I need... He stopped, dropped his hand. I should let you rest. He turned to go. Caleb... He stopped. I'm staying, not just for the teaching, for all of it. When he looked back at her, something in his expression had finally cracked open. Not quite hope, but close. Good, he said quietly. That's good. After he left, Evelyn stood in the kitchen for a long time, her heart racing, trying to understand what had just happened. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. She was still the teacher. He was still the grieving widower. They were still living in the same house with 2 children who needed them. But now there was something else there too. Something unnamed and fragile and possibly disastrous. And despite every practical instinct screaming at her to be careful, to protect herself, to remember what scandal had cost her before, Evelyn couldn't bring herself to care. She went to bed that night and dreamed of Boston for the first time in weeks. But in the dream, she was standing on a train platform, watching the city disappear in the distance. And she wasn't sad about leaving. She was relieved. Winter deepened into the kind of cold that made breathing hurt. February brought temperatures so low that water froze in the basin before Evelyn could wash her face, and the children's lessons moved closer to the stove because the far corners of the room were simply too cold to sit in. But something else was changing too. Something harder to name than the weather. Caleb started talking more. Not a lot. He'd never be a man of many words. But at dinner he'd ask about the children's progress. He'd mention things that happened during his day, small details about a difficult calf or a fence that needed mending. Once, He even told a story about Luke as a toddler that made Clara laugh so hard she nearly fell off her chair. The conversations were still punctuated by long silences, but the silences felt different now, less like walls and more like comfortable pauses. Evelyn caught herself watching him sometimes. The way his hands moved when he worked, efficient and sure. The rare occasions when he almost smiled at something Clara said. The quiet competence in everything he did. She was falling into something dangerous, and she knew it, but knowing didn't seem to stop it from happening. One evening in late February, Luke came in from feeding the horses looking troubled. "What's wrong?" Caleb asked, glancing up from the bridle he was mending. "Saw tracks out by the north pasture. Wolf tracks. Big ones." Caleb's expression darkened. "How many?" "At least 3, maybe more." "They take any cattle?" "Not yet, but they're circling, getting braver." Evelyn had heard wolves howling at night, sounds that raised every primitive fear she'd ever had, but she'd never seen one. "How dangerous are they?" "Depends how hungry they are." Caleb set down the bridle. "We'll need to keep watch tonight. Take shifts." "I can help," Evelyn offered. "No." "Caleb, it's not safe. End of discussion." The dismissal rankled, but before Evelyn could argue, Luke spoke up. "Actually, Pa, it might be good to have 3 people. That way we can do shorter shifts, stay sharper. And Miss Mercer can handle a rifle now. I taught her." Caleb's eyes snapped to his son. "You did what?" "She asked to learn. Figured it was smart, her being out here and all." Luke's voice was carefully neutral. "She's a decent shot." "That doesn't mean I want to help." Evelyn stepped forward. "You said yourself that I need to understand how things work out here. Well, this is how things work. Let me do my part." Caleb looked between them, his jaw tight. Finally, he nodded once, sharply. "Fine, but you stay on the porch. You see anything, you fire once into the air and get back inside. That's it." "Understood." They divided the night into 3-hour shifts. Luke took first watch, Caleb second, Evelyn third. At midnight, Caleb woke her with a gentle shake of her shoulder. She'd fallen asleep in her clothes, prepared for this. "Your turn. Luke's rifle is loaded and on the porch. Anything moves that you can't identify, you fire and come get me." "I know." "Evelyn." He waited until she met his eyes. "I mean it. Don't try to be brave, just fire and run." The way he said her name, like it meant something, made her chest tighten. "I'll be careful." The night was brutally cold. Evelyn wrapped herself in every blanket she could carry and settled into the chair on the porch, rifle across her lap. The moon was nearly full, turning the snow-covered landscape into something otherworldly, beautiful and hostile all at once. For the first hour, nothing happened, just wind and cold and the occasional sound of cattle shifting in the barn. Then she heard it, a howl, distant but clear. Another answered it, and another. Her hands tightened on the rifle. The howls got closer. She could see shapes now, dark against the snow, moving with a coordination that was terrifying. 5 of them. Maybe 6. They were heading toward the barn. Evelyn stood slowly, raising the rifle. Her hands were shaking from cold or fear, she wasn't sure. She sighted down the barrel the way Luke had taught her, aimed high, and fired. The crack of the gunshot shattered the silence. The wolves scattered, disappearing into the darkness. The front door flew open. Caleb appeared, rifle in hand, eyes scanning the landscape. "How many?" 5 or 6. They were heading for the barn." "You hit any?" "I fired over them, like you said." "Good." He moved to stand beside her, his eyes never stopping their constant sweep of the property. "They'll be back. Wolves are persistent." "Should I wake Luke?" "Let him sleep. I'm up now." They stood together in the cold, watching. Evelyn's ears rang from the gunshot, and her heart was still racing, but she felt oddly calm. She'd done it, faced something terrifying, and hadn't fallen apart. "You did well," Caleb said quietly. "Not many people stay steady their first time with wolves." "I was terrified." "Being terrified and doing it anyway, that's what courage is." Evelyn glanced at him. "Is that what you tell yourself when you're scared?" "I don't get scared." "Everyone gets scared." Caleb's mouth twitched, almost a smile. "All right. Yes, I get scared. But out here, scared doesn't change anything. You still have to do what needs doing. What scares you? The question was too personal. She knew it as soon as the words left her mouth. But Caleb didn't shut down like she expected. Failing them, he said, nodding toward the house where his children slept. Not being enough. Making a mistake that costs everything. He paused. You. That scares me too. Evelyn's breath caught. Me? You being here. Mattering. I swore after Mary died that I'd never let anyone matter like that again. It's easier, keeping people at a distance. Safer. But lonely. Yes. The word came out rough. Very lonely. Another howl echoed across the plains, but farther away now. The wolves were retreating. For tonight, at least. Caleb shifted closer, and Evelyn realized he was blocking the wind for her. A small thing. A careful thing. You should go in, he said. Get warm. I'll watch the rest of the night. We could both watch. Evelyn. I'm not going back to bed, Caleb, so you can either stand out here arguing with me or accept that I'm staying. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he went inside and came back with more blankets and another cup of terrible coffee. They sat together on the porch steps, rifles across their laps, watching the night. Not talking, just being. When dawn started coloring the eastern sky pink and gold, Caleb stood and offered her his hand. Come on, you must be frozen. Evelyn took his hand, and he pulled her to her feet. For just a second, they stood there, hands still clasped, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his face and something else that looked like hope. Then he let go and went to check on the cattle, and Evelyn went inside to start breakfast, and neither of them mentioned the moment on the porch. But it stayed with her all day. The wolf problem persisted through the week. More sightings, more watches, more nights of broken sleep, and constant vigilance. Other ranchers in the valley were having the same trouble. At the trading post, men gathered to discuss organizing a hunt to drive the pack out of the area. We need every able-bodied person, Jensen said, his voice carrying across the crowded room. Grayson, you in? Caleb nodded. When? Saturday. We'll meet at dawn, sweep the North Ridge. Should be able to track them back to their den. I'll be there. Evelyn, who'd come with Luke to pick up supplies, felt ice form in her stomach. Wolf hunts were dangerous. Men got hurt. Sometimes they didn't come back. On the ride home, she tried to keep her voice casual. How dangerous is it? A wolf hunt? Luke shrugged. Depends. If we find the den and they're cornered, it can get bad. But Pa's done it before. He knows what he's doing. That didn't make her feel better. Saturday morning arrived too quickly. Caleb was up before dawn, checking his rifle, packing supplies. Clara clung to him at the door. You'll come back, right, Papa? Always do. That's what Mama said, and she didn't. The words hit like a punch. Caleb's face went pale, and he knelt down to his daughter's level. Clara, listen to me. Your mama didn't leave on purpose. What happened to her wasn't something anyone could control. But I promise you, I'm being careful. I'm coming back. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. He held her tight. I can, and I do. I'm coming back. Luke appeared, his own rifle in hand. I'm going with you. No. Pa! You're staying here. Someone needs to protect the ranch if more wolves come. I can shoot better than half those men you're riding with. I said no, Luke. Caleb's voice was firm. You stay here. You protect your sister. You help Miss Mercer. That's your job today. Luke's jaw clenched, but he nodded. Yes, sir. Caleb stood and turned to Evelyn. For a moment, he just looked at her, like he was memorizing her face. Keep them safe. I will. And if I'm not back by nightfall, you will be. But if I'm not, Luke knows what to do. Trust him. Caleb, her voice broke slightly. She couldn't help it. He stepped closer, close enough that Clara couldn't hear. I'm coming back, he said quietly. I have reasons to. Then he was gone, riding north with a group of men, leaving Evelyn standing on the porch with 2 frightened children and a house that suddenly felt far too empty. The day crawled past. Evelyn tried to keep the children busy with lessons, but none of them could focus. Clara kept going to the window, watching for her father. Luke paced like a caged animal, checking and rechecking his rifle. By mid-afternoon, Evelyn gave up on teaching and made them help with chores instead. Anything to keep moving, to stop thinking about what might be happening in the mountains. Evening came. No sign of the hunting party. Clara started crying. "He's not coming back. I knew he wouldn't come back." "He's coming back," Evelyn said, with more confidence than she felt. "The hunt probably just took longer than expected. Or something happened to him." Evelyn pulled Clara close. "Your father is strong and careful, and he promised. That has to be enough." But as full dark fell and there was still no sign of riders on the horizon, Evelyn's confidence began to crack. Luke stood at the window, his young face carved from stone. "I should have gone with him. He needed you here. He needed someone watching his back. Luke, you don't understand. Ma died because nobody was there. If someone had been with her, she might have—" His voice broke. "I can't lose him too." Evelyn went to him, put her hand on his shoulder. This boy who tried so hard to be a man, who carried grief that would have destroyed most adults. "You won't. He's coming back." "How do you know?" "Because he has to. Because we're all waiting for him. Because—" She stopped, realizing what she was about to say. "Because I need him to." When had that happened? When had this rough, silent rancher become necessary to her? When had this isolated ranch started feeling like home? She didn't know. Maybe there was no single moment. Maybe it had been happening gradually, one conversation at a time, one shared silence, one small act of care. Near midnight, Clara finally fell asleep in Evelyn's lap. Luke dozed in a chair, his rifle still close. Evelyn sat by the window, watching the darkness, trying to pray but finding she'd forgotten how. Then finally, she saw lights, torches moving across the plains. "Luke, wake up! They're coming!" Luke bolted upright, instantly alert. Together they watched the riders approach. Evelyn counted them quickly. 1, 2, 3. She'd lost track of how many had gone out. Were they all there? Was Caleb among them? The riders got closer. She could make out shapes now. Jensen, Henderson, Morrison. And there, Caleb. Riding slowly, favoring his left side but alive. Evelyn ran outside without thinking, not even grabbing a coat. Luke was right behind her. Caleb dismounted carefully, moving like everything hurt. His coat was torn, and there was blood on his sleeve. "You're hurt," Evelyn said, reaching for him. "It's not bad. Wolf got past me, caught my arm. I'm fine." "You're bleeding." "I've had worse." But he swayed slightly, and Evelyn moved closer to steady him. Jensen spoke from his horse. "We got the pack. Den was bigger than we thought. 8 wolves total. Grayson here saved Morrison's life when one of them doubled back. Took a hit doing it, but he kept his head." "That's enough, Jensen," Caleb said quietly. "Just telling the truth." Jensen tipped his hat. "We'll get the rest of the men home. You take care of that arm." After they left, Evelyn got Caleb inside and into the kitchen. Luke hovered nearby while she carefully removed his torn coat. The wound wasn't deep, but it was ugly, a series of gashes across his forearm where claws had torn through. It needed cleaning and bandaging. "This is going to hurt," Evelyn warned. "I know." She worked as gently as she could, cleaning the wound with whiskey that made Caleb's jaw clench but drew no sound from him. His tolerance for pain was almost frightening. "You should have been more careful," she said, wrapping the clean bandages she'd found. "Didn't have a choice. Morrison would have been killed." "And if you'd been killed?" "I wasn't." "But you could have been." Her hands were shaking now, the fear she'd been holding back all day finally breaking through. "You could have died out there, and we would have been here waiting, but I didn't." Caleb caught her hand with his good one. "I'm here. I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're hurt and exhausted, and you took a stupid risk saving someone else when you have children who need you." "Evelyn, don't. Don't tell me it's part of the job, or that's how things work out here, or any of those things you say, when you won't talk about what actually matters." Caleb stared at her. "What actually matters?" "That I was terrified. That Clara cried for hours thinking you weren't coming back. That Luke stood at that window all day trying to be brave and failing. That we—" She stopped, realizing what she was about to admit. "That you what?" "That we need you. All of us. Not just as a rancher or an employer or whatever else you think you are. We need you here. Alive. Safe." The silence stretched between them. Clara was asleep upstairs. Luke had disappeared outside, giving them privacy they hadn't asked for. Caleb's thumb moved across the back of her hand, a gesture so small and so intimate that it made her breath catch. "I thought about you," he said quietly. "Out there. When the wolf came at me, my first thought wasn't about dying. It was about you waiting here, about not making it back to you. Caleb, I know this is complicated. I know people are talking and there are 100 reasons this shouldn't—" He stopped, started again. "But I can't stop thinking about you, can't stop wanting—" He didn't finish, didn't need to. Evelyn stepped closer, bridging the last distance between them. "Me either." For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Then Caleb lifted his good hand and very carefully touched her face, just his fingertips tracing her cheekbone like she was something precious and breakable. "I don't know how to do this," he admitted. "It's been so long since—" "I don't know either. We should probably be sensible. Think about the children and the gossip and—" "Probably. But I don't want to be sensible." "Good, because neither do I." When he kissed her, it was tentative and clumsy, and nothing like the romantic moments Evelyn had read about in novels. His injured arm was between them, the bandages awkward. He bumped her nose first, then had to adjust the angle. But it was real. More real than anything she'd felt in years. When they finally pulled apart, Caleb was almost smiling, an actual genuine smile that transformed his whole face. "That was terrible," Evelyn finished, laughing quietly. "Absolutely terrible. Completely." But he was still smiling. "We should probably try again, practice." "Probably." This time was better. Still not perfect. Nothing about them was perfect. But it was theirs. When they finally separated, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. "The town's going to lose their minds. Let them. Your reputation is already ruined, remember? I came here with nothing to lose." And now? Evelyn thought about that. About everything she'd found in this impossible place. "Now I have everything to lose, and I don't care." They stood there in the kitchen, holding each other carefully, while outside the window the first hints of dawn colored the sky. Upstairs, a door opened. Small footsteps on the stairs. They separated quickly, but not quite quickly enough. Clara appeared in the doorway, rubbing her eyes. She looked at her father, then at Evelyn, then back to her father. Her expression went from sleepy to delighted in about 2 seconds. "Are you going to get married?" Caleb looked panicked. Evelyn felt her face flush bright red. "Clara, that's not— we weren't—" Caleb struggled for words. "Because Luke said you probably would eventually, and I said maybe, and Sarah Henderson said her pa said people in town are saying you should. So are you?" "Clara, I think you should. Miss Mercer is nice, and she's pretty, and she makes you smile sometimes, and you didn't smile at all after Mama died until she came." The simple honesty of it hit them both hard. Caleb knelt down to his daughter's level, wincing slightly from his injured arm. "Clara, Miss Mercer and I, we care about each other, but that doesn't mean we're getting married. That's a big decision that takes time." "But you like her?" "Yes." "And she likes you?" He looked up at Evelyn helplessly. "Yes," Evelyn said, her heart pounding. "I do." Clara beamed. "Then that's settled. You'll get married, and Miss Mercer will stay forever, and everything will be good again." If only life were that simple. But looking at Clara's hopeful face and Caleb's expression that was equal parts terror and something that might have been hope, Evelyn thought maybe sometimes it was. Not perfect, not easy, but possible. And that was enough. The days after that night developed a strange new rhythm. Nothing had been formally decided or announced, but everything had shifted. Caleb found excuses to be near her. His hand would brush hers when she passed him coffee. He'd stand closer than necessary when they worked together in the kitchen. Small touches, brief moments, but they added up to something that made the house feel different, warmer, less lonely. The children noticed, of course. Clara became impossibly excited, constantly asking when the wedding would be. Luke watched them with a wariness that gradually softened into something like approval. But the town noticed too. Mrs. Winters pulled Evelyn aside one day at the trading post. "People are saying Caleb Grayson's courting you properly now." "Are they?" "Don't play coy. Half the valley saw you two on the porch after he got back from the wolf hunt, and the other half heard about it by noon, so what's the truth? Evelyn met her eyes steadily. The truth is, we care about each other. What happens beyond that is nobody's business but ours. Mrs. Winters studied her for a long moment. Then she smiled. Good answer. That man's been alone too long. Needs someone with spine to stand up to him. I'm not trying to replace his wife. Didn't say you were. Mary Grayson was a saint, no doubt. But she's gone, and Caleb's still here. He deserves a chance at happiness, and so do you. She paused. Though I'll tell you straight, there are folks in town who won't approve, who'll say it's too soon or not proper or whatever else they need to say to feel superior. I know. Can you handle that? Evelyn thought about Boston, about whispers behind fans and doors closing in her face, and the slow, terrible erosion of dignity that came with being scandalous. I've handled worse, she said quietly. I believe you have. Mrs. Winters reached across the counter and patted her hand. You're tougher than you look, girl. You'll need that out here. On the way home, Luke was unusually quiet. Something on your mind? Evelyn asked. Are you really going to marry Pa? The question was blunt, but Luke had never been one for subtlety. I don't know. We haven't talked about it. But you want to. Did she? Marriage to Caleb would mean staying here forever. No return to Boston. No chance of reclaiming her old life. It meant accepting this harsh landscape, this isolation, this life that was nothing like what she'd planned. But it also meant the children, meant mornings with terrible coffee and evenings on the porch, meant being part of something that mattered. Yes, Evelyn said. I think I do. Luke nodded slowly. Good, because Clara's not the only one who wants you to stay. No? No. He kept his eyes on the road. You make things better, the house, Pa, everything. It's like, before you came, we were all just surviving. Now it feels like we're actually living again. Evelyn's throat tightened. That's one of the nicest things anyone's ever said to me. It's true. Luke paused. But I gotta ask, you sure you can handle it? Being a rancher's wife out here? It's not like Boston. It's hard and lonely, and sometimes things go wrong and people die and... His voice cracked slightly. I know it's hard. But do you really? Or are you just saying that because you think you should? Evelyn thought carefully before answering. I won't pretend I know everything about this life. I've been here less than half a year. There's probably 100 things I haven't learned yet, 100 ways I'll make mistakes. But I know I'd rather be here making mistakes than be anywhere else getting things right. Luke looked at her finally, really looked at her. Yeah, I believe that. When they got home, they found Caleb working on building something in the barn. Wood and tools scattered around him, measuring and cutting with fierce concentration. What are you making? Evelyn asked. He looked up, and she could have sworn he looked embarrassed. Desks, for the school. Been meaning to do it for a while. We're really getting a school? Should have had one months ago. We'll put it up this spring. Simple building, but proper. The kids deserve it. Evelyn walked around the partially assembled desks. They were rough but solid, made to last, made with care. These are wonderful. They're just desks. No, they're not. She turned to face him. They're proof that you believe this will last, that there will be children here learning for years to come. Caleb set down his tools and came closer. Yeah, I do believe that. They stood there as the barn, sawdust in the air, winter light slanting through the cracks in the walls, and Evelyn felt something settle inside her. This was home now, not Boston, not the life she'd planned. This. Caleb, she said quietly, if you were going to ask me something important, hypothetically, what would you say? He went very still. Hypothetically? Yes. I'd probably mess it up, say it wrong. I'm not good with words. Try anyway. Caleb took a breath. I'd say that I know this isn't what you planned, that I'm not easy to live with and the frontier is hard and there'll be lean years and tough times. I'd say that I can't promise it'll be perfect or even easy. He paused, but I'd also say that you've brought my family back to life, that my children love you, that I... He stopped, struggling. That you what? That I love you too. Even though I swore I wouldn't love anyone again, even though it terrifies me. He met her eyes. And I'd ask if maybe you'd consider making this permanent, officially. Marriage, if you wanted. It wasn't eloquent. It wasn't romantic. It was clumsy and honest and absolutely perfect. Yes, Evelyn said simply. Yes? Yes, I'll marry you. Caleb stared at her like he couldn't quite believe it. You're sure? I'm sure. Even though I'm terrible at talking and I'll probably forget anniversaries and Evelyn kissed him to stop the words. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Caleb was shaking his head. We should probably tell the children before the whole town knows. Probably. But they stood there a moment longer, holding on to each other in the dusty barn, before facing whatever came next. That evening, Caleb called the children into the kitchen after dinner. Clara bounced with barely contained excitement. Luke tried to look casual and failed completely. Miss Mercer and I have something to tell you, Caleb began. You're getting married! Clara shrieked before he could continue. Caleb winced at the volume. Yes, we are. If you're both all right with it. I'm extremely all right with it, Clara said seriously. Can I call her Mama? The question stopped everyone. Evelyn knelt down to Clara's level. Sweetheart, I'm not trying to replace your mother. She was special and important, and she'll always be your mama. I could never take her place. I know that, Clara's voice was matter of fact. But she's gone, and you're here, and I think she'd want me to have someone. Someone who stays and reads to me and teaches me things. So can I? Evelyn looked at Caleb helplessly. He nodded slightly, leaving the decision to her. If it feels right to you, Evelyn said carefully, then yes, you can. Clara threw herself into Evelyn's arms with such force they nearly toppled over. Luke stood awkwardly to the side, looking like he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Evelyn stood, still holding Clara, and looked at him. Luke, are you all right with this? Yeah. His voice was rough. Yeah, I am. He paused. I won't call you Mama, though. It's not that I don't want to, but you don't have to explain. Evelyn is fine. He nodded, relief visible on his face. Then, surprising everyone, he stepped forward and hugged her quickly before pulling back and pretending it hadn't happened. That night, lying in bed, Evelyn stared at the ceiling and tried to process what had just happened. In a few months, because they couldn't wait long, not with the gossip already spreading, she'd be Evelyn Grayson, wife to a rancher, mother to 2 children who weren't hers by blood but were becoming hers in every way that mattered. It should have terrified her. Instead, she felt calm. This was right, all of it. The isolation, the hard work, the family she'd found in the most unlikely place. She'd come to Red Hollow running from shame and scandal, expecting nothing but a job and a roof over her head. Instead, she'd found a reason to stay. They set the wedding for late March, when the worst of winter would be past, and before spring planting demanded every minute of Caleb's attention. It would be simple, just family and a few neighbors in the half-built schoolhouse that Caleb and the other men had been working on whenever weather permitted. Simple, practical. Exactly what made sense for 2 people who'd already been living under the same roof for months. But 3 weeks before the wedding, everything changed. It started with rumors filtering in from ranches to the east. Cattle missing, fences cut. A barn burned to the ground with no explanation except a single set of boot prints leading away into the dark. Rustlers, Jensen said at the trading post, his voice tight with anger. Got to be. Same pattern as that gang that hit the territory 2 years back. They're testing us, seeing how we respond. Caleb's expression was grim. How many head has Morrison lost? 15 that he's counted. Could be more scattered in the high country. And the Kellerman place? 20 at least. They hit him hard, probably figured he was an easy target since he's running it alone after his brother died. The men gathered closer, their voices low and urgent. Evelyn stood near the door with Clara, trying not to eavesdrop but hearing everything anyway. We need to organize, Henderson said. Set up watches, ride patrols. Can't let them think we're easy pickings. Agreed, Caleb said. But we're spread too thin. Most of us are running skeleton crews as it is. We start pulling men for patrols, we fall behind on spring work. What's the alternative? Let them steal us blind? The debate continued for another hour. Finally, they agreed to form rotating patrols, 2 men riding the boundaries between ranches, changing shifts every few days. It would strain everyone, but it was better than doing nothing. On the ride home, Caleb was silent. Evelyn could see the calculations running behind his eyes. How to protect the ranch, keep up with work, and still make it to his own wedding. "How bad is this?" she asked quietly. "Bad enough." Caleb's hands tightened on the reins. "If it's the same gang from before, they're organized, smart. They'll hit us systematically, wear us down until we're too exhausted to fight back." "What happened last time?" 3 ranchers lost everything. 2 families left the valley entirely. The gang disappeared before anyone could track them down. He paused. "We can't let that happen again." The first patrol went out 2 nights later. Caleb took the early shift with Jensen, riding out into darkness with rifles and determination. Luke wanted desperately to go, but Caleb was firm. Someone had to stay and protect the ranch itself. Evelyn lay awake that whole night, listening for sounds that didn't belong. Every creak of the house made her heart race. Every distant noise could have been cattle being driven away, or men with torches, or any of the 100 dangers her imagination conjured. Caleb came back at dawn, exhausted but unhurt. "Nothing," he said shortly. "Either they're not working this far west yet, or they know we're watching." 3 days of patrols turned into a week, then 2 weeks. The men grew haggard from lack of sleep and the constant tension. Spring work fell behind, tempers frayed, and still no sign of the rustlers. "Maybe they moved on," Luke said hopefully one evening. Caleb shook his head. "They're out there, waiting. The quiet's worse than action, means they're planning something big." He was right. The attack came on a moonless night, 2 weeks before the wedding. Not at the Grayson Ranch, but at Henderson's place, isolated, vulnerable, with a man still struggling to keep things together after his wife's death. They set fire to his hay barn first. While Henderson and his children scrambled to save it, the rustlers drove off nearly 40 head of cattle. By the time help arrived, the barn was ash and the cattle were gone. Evelyn heard about it the next morning when Mrs. Winters appeared at the ranch, her face pale. "Henderson's ruined," she said bluntly. "That was his breeding stock. He's got nothing left to build on." "Where is he now?" Evelyn asked. "At his place, trying to salvage what he can. But the kids are terrified, and he's not handling it well." Evelyn was already grabbing her coat. "I'm going over there." "Evelyn?" Caleb started. "Those children need someone, and Henderson needs help, whether he knows it or not. I'm going." Something in her voice stopped his argument. He nodded once. "Luke will drive you. I need to meet with the other ranchers, figure out our next move." The Henderson place looked even worse in daylight. The barn was a blackened skeleton, smoke still rising from the ruins. The house was intact but felt violated somehow, like the attack had poisoned the air itself. The children were huddled inside, silent and wide-eyed. Henderson sat at the table, staring at nothing, his hands clenched into fists. "Mr. Henderson," Evelyn said gently, "I've brought food and supplies." He didn't respond. Sarah, the oldest, spoke instead. "He hasn't talked since it happened, just sits there." Evelyn had seen this before, the shutdown that came with trauma too big to process. She'd watched her father do the same thing after his business collapsed. "Sarah, can you and your siblings go outside for a bit? Stay close to the house, but give your father and me some privacy." The girl nodded, grateful to have clear instructions. She herded her younger siblings out. Evelyn sat down across from Henderson. "I know you can hear me, so I'm going to talk and you can listen or not. That's your choice." No response. "What happened wasn't your fault. You did everything right. You joined the patrols, you kept watch, you tried to protect your family. But sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes bad things happen anyway, and it's not fair and it's not right, but it's real." Henderson's jaw clenched slightly. "And I know you're thinking about giving up, about how you can't recover from this, how it's too much on top of losing Mary, how maybe your children would be better off somewhere else with someone who isn't failing them." His eyes finally moved, focusing on her face. "But here's what I know," Evelyn continued, her voice steady. "Your children don't need you to be perfect. They don't need you to have all the answers or to fix everything. They just need you to be here, to keep trying, to not give up, even when giving up would be easier." "You don't understand." Henderson's voice was raw. "I understand that you're scared, that you've lost so much you can't imagine surviving another loss. But you're still here, and so are they, And that means there's still something to fight for. Henderson's face crumpled. I can't do this. Can't rebuild. Can't. Not alone, no. But you're not alone. The whole valley is fighting this together. They have their own problems, their own ranches to protect. And they'll still help you, because that's what people do out here. They help each other survive. Later, when Evelyn returned to the Grayson Ranch, she found it in chaos. Men on horseback filled the yard, voices raised in argument. Caleb stood in the middle of it all, his face like stone. Need to go after them now, while the trail's still fresh. We don't have enough men for a hunting party. We'd be leaving our own ranches defenseless. So we just let them keep stealing from us? Caleb's voice cut through the noise. We need a plan, not just riding out in anger and hoping for the best. What kind of plan? Morrison demanded. They're picking us off one by one. Henderson today, one of us tomorrow. I know that. Caleb's patience was clearly wearing thin, which is why we need to be smart about this. Smart hasn't stopped them so far. Neither has panic. Caleb's eyes swept the gathered men. Everyone go home, protect your own places. We'll meet tomorrow at the trading post and come up with something that actually works. The men dispersed reluctantly, still arguing among themselves. When the last one had gone, Caleb's shoulders sagged slightly. How bad is it? Evelyn asked. Bad. They're scared, and scared men make stupid decisions. He rubbed his face tiredly. Henderson's stock wasn't the only target. They hit 2 other places last night, small raids, just enough to spread fear and keep us off balance. What are you going to do? I don't know yet. The admission clearly cost him. We can't keep this up, the patrols, the constant watching. We're exhausted, falling behind on work, and the rustlers know it. They're wearing us down on purpose. Luke appeared from the barn. Pa, north fence has been cut. Found it about an hour ago. Caleb's expression went cold. Did they take any cattle? Don't think so, but they were here, on our land. It was a message, a threat. We can reach you any time we want. That night, Caleb barely slept. Evelyn heard him moving around downstairs, checking locks, looking out windows. She found him on the porch near dawn, rifle across his lap, watching the horizon. You can't stay awake forever, she said quietly. I can try. Caleb, they were here, on my land, near my children. His voice was rough with exhaustion and something darker. I should have seen this coming, should have been more prepared. You can't predict everything. I should have protected them better. Evelyn sat down beside him. You're doing everything you can. We all are. It's not enough. Then we'll figure out what is. Together. He looked at her then. Really looked at her. You should leave. Take Clara and go somewhere safe until this is over. No. Evelyn, this is serious. These men are dangerous. Which is exactly why I'm staying. You think I'd run and leave you and Luke here alone? Leave the other families to face this without help? She took his hand. I'm not that person anymore. I don't run from hard things. This could get people killed. I know. But leaving won't change that. Caleb was quiet for a long moment. Then, I don't deserve you. Good thing I'm not asking what you deserve. Despite everything, he almost smiled. Then the moment passed, and he was back to scanning the darkness, watching for threats that could come from anywhere. The meeting at the trading post the next day was tense. Every rancher in the valley showed up, along with their wives and older children. Mrs. Winters had cleared space for everyone to gather, and the room felt claustrophobic with worry. We need to track them, Morrison said immediately. Find their camp and end this. With what men? Caleb asked. We're barely keeping up with patrols as it is. Then we hire help, bring in professionals. With what money? We're all struggling after the winter losses. The argument went in circles. Track them. Defend in place, hire help, leave the valley entirely. Every suggestion had fatal flaws. Finally, Evelyn stood up. The room went quiet. Women didn't usually speak at these meetings, and everyone knew it. I have an idea, she said, her voice steady despite her racing heart. It might not work, but it's better than what we're doing now. Caleb looked surprised but nodded for her to continue. We're scattered, Evelyn said, each ranch defending itself separately. That's what makes us vulnerable. But what if we consolidated? Moved the most vulnerable families, Henderson, the Kellermans, anyone running alone, into more protected locations. Combined our watches and patrols, made ourselves a harder target. You're talking about abandoning our ranches, Jensen said flatly. Temporarily, until we can organize a real response. And who decides what happens to abandoned property? Who's responsible if we all are? Evelyn's voice was firm. We protect each other's places as if they were our own. Share the work, share the risk, share whatever losses come. Morrison shook his head. That's asking a lot, trusting someone else with everything you own. Yes, it is. Evelyn met his eyes. But it's better than losing everything because you tried to fight alone. The room erupted into debate. Some thought the idea was brilliant. Others called it naive. A few suggested modifications, not full abandonment, but strategic consolidation, pulling families with children to the larger, more defensible ranches. Caleb listened to all of it, his expression unreadable. Finally, he spoke. It could work. Not perfectly, but better than what we have now. He looked around the room. The Grayson Ranch can take in the Hendersons and the Kellermans. We've got space, and we're centrally located. Morrison, your place is the most defensible. You take the families with the youngest children. Jensen, you coordinate the patrols from your location. People started nodding. The plan was taking shape. Mrs. Winters stood up. The trading post can be our communication hub. Messages, supplies, coordination. Anyone needs anything, they come here first. By the end of the meeting, they had the skeleton of a real defense. Not perfect, plenty of holes. But it was something organized, something coordinated, something that might actually work. As people filed out, several men approached Caleb, clapping him on the shoulder, praising the strategy. But Evelyn noticed him deflecting, nodding toward her. When they were finally alone, walking back to the wagon, Caleb took her hand. That was brilliant, he said quietly. It was obvious. You would have thought of it eventually. Maybe, but you thought of it first. He stopped walking, turned to face her. You just took charge of an entire valley of stubborn ranchers. Do you know how rare that is? I just suggested you led. There's a difference. His expression was intense. You're not just a teacher anymore, Evelyn. You're becoming something else out here. What? Someone they listen to, someone they trust, someone who can hold this community together when everything's falling apart. The weight of that realization settled on her shoulders. She'd come here to teach children. Somewhere along the way, she'd become something more. The Hendersons and Kellermans moved into the Grayson Ranch 2 days later. The house was suddenly full of people and noise and needs. 9 children total, 3 adults, all crammed into space that had felt spacious with just the 4 of them. Evelyn organized it like a military campaign. Sleeping arrangements, meal schedules, teaching rotations for the children, chore assignments. Clara loved having other kids around constantly. Luke was less thrilled, but adapted. Sarah Henderson became Evelyn's right hand, helping manage the younger children and taking over some of the teaching. The girl was only 13, but had grown up fast in the last year. Thank you, she said quietly one evening while they were washing dishes together, for what you said to Pa. He's been different since then. Better. He just needed to remember why he was fighting. We all did. Sarah scrubbed a plate with fierce concentration. After Mama died, it felt like we were just waiting for the next bad thing, like nothing good would ever happen again. But being here, being part of this, it feels like maybe we're fighting for something instead of just surviving. 2 weeks passed. The consolidated defense held. There were no more raids, though the tension never fully eased. Men still rode patrols, still watched the darkness, still jumped at unexpected sounds. The rustlers seemed to have vanished. They're planning something, Caleb said grimly. This quiet isn't natural. He was right. The attack came just after midnight, 3 nights before the wedding. Not a raid this time, a full assault. Evelyn woke to the sound of gunfire. For a moment, she couldn't process what she was hearing. Then Caleb was at her door, fully dressed, rifle in hand. Get the children into the root cellar. Now. Don't come out until I give the all clear. What's happening? They're hitting us, all of us. This isn't a raid. It's a war. He was gone before she could respond. Evelyn moved on instinct, gathering children in the darkness. Claire was crying. The younger Henderson boy was frozen with fear. She got them all downstairs into the cellar, counting heads twice to make sure no one was missing. Stay quiet, she told Sarah. Keep them calm. I'll be back. Where are you going? To help. Miss Mercer. But Evelyn was already moving, grabbing the rifle Luke had taught her to use, heading toward the sounds of fighting. Outside was chaos. Fire lit up the night. Not the barn, thank heaven, but an outbuilding. Men on horseback circled the property, firing sporadically. Caleb and Luke were returning fire from behind the wagon, their shots precise and controlled. Evelyn ran to the porch, taking cover behind a support post. Her hands were shaking, but she forced them steady. Aimed, fired, missed, aimed again. This time the rider she'd targeted wheeled away, and she didn't know if she'd hit him or just scared him. The fight seemed to last hours, but was probably only minutes. Finally, the attackers retreated, vanishing into the darkness as quickly as they'd come. In the sudden silence, Evelyn's ears rang. Smoke stung her eyes. She lowered the rifle carefully and looked around. Caleb was running toward the outbuilding with a bucket. Luke was right behind him. The fire was small enough to control, and within minutes they had it out. No one was seriously hurt, a few minor wounds. The outbuilding was damaged but salvageable. They'd been lucky. This was just a warning, Morrison said when he arrived with reinforcements an hour later. They're showing us they can hit us whenever they want. Then we hit back, Caleb said flatly. No more defense. We track them down and end this. How? They disappear like ghosts. They have to be camping somewhere with water, shelter, close enough to reach the valley, but far enough to feel safe. Caleb looked at the mountains to the north. My guess is the old mining country. Plenty of abandoned camps up there. That's a lot of territory to search. Then we better get started. The plan came together quickly. A hunting party, 10 men, the best trackers and shots in the valley. They'd leave at dawn, track the rustlers to their camp, and end the threat permanently. Evelyn found Caleb as he was preparing his gear. You're going? Yes. When? Dawn. He didn't look at her. Could be gone a week, maybe more. The wedding. We'll have to wait. Evelyn had known he'd say that, had known this was coming from the moment the attack started, but hearing it still hurt. Be careful. Always am. Caleb, look at me. He did, finally. His eyes were haunted. Come back, she said simply. I don't care how long it takes or what you have to do. Just come back. I will. Promise me. Evelyn, promise me. Caleb pulled her close, holding her tight. I promise. Whatever it takes, I'm coming back to you. They stood there in the pre-dawn darkness, holding each other like they could stop time by sheer force of will. Then the sun started to rise, and the hunting party assembled, and Caleb rode north with 9 other men, leaving Evelyn to hold the ranch and the children and the fragile hope that this time the promise would be enough. The first 3 days were the worst. No word from the hunting party, no way to know if they'd found the rustlers' camp or ridden into a trap. The remaining families huddled together, jumping at every sound, watching the horizon for riders that never came. Evelyn kept everyone busy. Teaching, chores, repairs, anything to stop them from thinking about the men who might not come back. On the 4th day, Mrs. Winters arrived with news. Morrison's son rode in. They found the camp. There was a fight. Evelyn's heart stopped. And they won. Killed 3 rustlers, captured 4 more. The rest scattered. It's over. Casualties? 2 wounded. Jensen took a bullet in the leg. Henderson got grazed, but no one... Mrs. Winters paused. No one died. Evelyn's legs nearly gave out with relief. They're coming back tomorrow, Mrs. Winters continued, bringing the captured rustlers to Carson City for trial. Should be home by evening. That night, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She lay in bed watching moonlight move across the ceiling, letting herself finally feel the fear she'd been holding back for days. They'd won. It was over. Caleb was coming home. The hunting party arrived just after sunset the next day, exhausted and filthy, but alive. Evelyn stood on the porch with all the children, watching the riders approach. Caleb dismounted slowly, moving like everything hurt. He had a cut above his eye, and his clothes were torn, but he was whole, alive. Clara ran to him first, nearly knocking him over. Luke was right behind her. Caleb held them both, his face buried in Clara's hair, his shoulders shaking slightly. Evelyn waited, giving him that moment with his children. Then he looked up and met her eyes. The relief in his expression mirrored her own. When the children finally released him, Caleb walked to the porch. He stopped in front of Evelyn, just looking at her like he was making sure she was real. "You came back," she said. "I promised." "I know, but promises, I know." They stood there, not touching, surrounded by people, but completely alone in that moment. "The wedding," Caleb said. "I know we had to postpone, but—" "This weekend," Evelyn interrupted. "If you still want to. If I—" He actually laughed, the sound rough and wonderful. "Yes, this weekend. Absolutely." 3 days later, on a bright spring morning, Evelyn Mercer married Caleb Grayson in the new schoolhouse that finally had a roof and 4 walls and desks made with care. The entire valley attended, even the families who'd gossiped, who'd disapproved, who'd called the arrangement improper. They came because Evelyn had helped save their community, and that bought forgiveness for a lot of sins. She wore a simple dress. He wore his best shirt. Clara stood beside her, beaming. Luke stood next to his father, trying to look solemn and failing. The ceremony was short. The words were traditional, but when Caleb said, "I do," and looked at her like she'd hung the moon, Evelyn felt something settle deep in her chest. This was home. This was family. This was everything she'd thought she'd lost forever, found in the last place she'd ever expected to look. Afterward, there was food and music and celebration. Someone had brought a fiddle. Children ran wild. Adults laughed and told stories about the fight against the rustlers, already turning fear into legend. Late in the evening, Evelyn found herself on the porch of the schoolhouse, watching the party continue inside. Caleb appeared beside her, 2 cups of something stronger than coffee in his hands. "Happy?" he asked. "Yes. You?" "Terrified, but yes." She laughed. "Why terrified?" "Because this matters. You matter. And I'm—" He struggled for words. "I'm not good at this. The emotional stuff, the talking. I'm going to mess up." "Probably. That doesn't bother you?" "Not really." Evelyn took the cup from him. "I mess things up too. That's what people do. We just have to promise to fix things when we break them." "I can do that." "Then we'll be fine." They stood together, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, and Evelyn thought about the girl who'd stepped off a stagecoach 6 months ago, desperate, afraid, running from everything she'd lost. That girl wouldn't recognize who she'd become. And that was exactly how it should be. Marriage, Evelyn discovered, didn't magically transform anything. The work was still brutal, the isolation still pressed in during long winters, and Caleb was still a man of few words who expressed affection through actions rather than declarations. But the small things changed. She woke up to find him watching her sometimes, like he still couldn't quite believe she was real. He started leaving wildflowers on her pillow when spring arrived, clumsy, half-wilted things that meant more than roses ever could. And at night, when the children were asleep, they'd sit together and talk about nothing and everything until the fire burned low. It wasn't perfect, but it was theirs. The first real test came in June, when a letter arrived from Boston. Evelyn recognized the handwriting immediately. Her former fiancé, Thomas Whitmore. She stared at the envelope for a full minute before opening it, her hands shaking slightly. Caleb noticed. "Bad news?" "I don't know yet." The letter was short. Thomas had heard through mutual acquaintances that she was living in Nevada territory. He wanted to apologize for how things had ended. His family's financial situation had improved, and if she was willing to return to Boston, he would honor their original engagement. Evelyn read it twice, trying to feel something. Anger, vindication, anything. Instead, she felt nothing but a distant sort of pity for the man who thought she'd want to go back. "What does it say?" Caleb's voice was carefully neutral, but she could see tension in his shoulders. "My former fiancé wants me to come back to Boston. Says he'll marry me after all, now that his family's money problems are resolved." The silence stretched. Caleb stared at the table, his jaw working. "Are you going to?" he finally asked. Evelyn looked at him, really looked at him. This man who'd taken her in when she had nowhere else to go. Who'd let her into his broken family and somehow let her help put the pieces back together. Who loved her in quiet, steadfast ways that Thomas Whitmore had never understood. "No," she said simply. "I'm not going anywhere." The relief on Caleb's face was almost painful to see. You sure? Boston's what you knew. Your whole life was there. My whole old life. This is my life now. She reached across the table and took his hand. Besides, I have a school to run and a ranch to help manage and 2 children who need me. I don't have time to go back to being a proper Boston lady. Caleb's fingers tightened around hers. Thank you. For what? Choosing this, choosing us. He paused. I know it's not easy. Know you gave up a lot. I gave up a life that was killing me slowly and found one worth living instead. That's not a sacrifice. That's survival. She burned the letter that evening, watching the paper curl and blacken in the stove. Caleb stood behind her, his hands on her shoulders, and together they watched the last connection to her old life turn to ash. Summer brought its own challenges. A drought that lasted 6 weeks, cattle dying from the heat, water sources drying up until they had to haul barrels from the river 5 miles away. But it also brought the completed schoolhouse, finished just before the fall term started. Evelyn stood in the empty building the day before classes began, looking at the desks Caleb had made, the shelves Luke had helped install, the slate boards Mrs. Winters had donated. She'd started teaching 9 children in a crowded kitchen. Now she had 23 enrolled, with more families talking about settling in the valley because word had spread that Red Hollow had a real school with a real teacher. Clara burst through the door, breathless with excitement. Mama, Luke says the Henderson boys are bringing their cousin tomorrow. That makes 24 students. Mama. The word still caught Evelyn off guard sometimes, even though Clara had been using it for months. But it fit now. It belonged. Then we better make sure we have enough supplies, Evelyn said, smiling. That first day of the fall term felt like a celebration. Children filled the schoolhouse, their voices echoing off the walls. Some could barely write their names. Others were reading simple books. A few, like Clara and Sarah Henderson, were advanced enough for more complex lessons. Evelyn divided them into groups, rotating between skill levels, teaching reading and writing and arithmetic and history. It was exhausting and chaotic and absolutely perfect. During lunch, she stood outside and watched her students play in the yard. Luke was showing the younger boys how to skip stones. Clara was organizing the girls into some complicated game with rules only they understood. Sarah was reading in the shade, already working through the book Evelyn had lent her. You did this, a voice said behind her. She turned to find Caleb leaning against the building, watching the scene with an expression she couldn't quite read. I just taught them, Evelyn said. No, you gave them a future. Most of these kids would have grown up barely able to read their own names. Now they've got a chance at something more. He stepped closer. That matters. What you're doing here matters. The weight of it settled on her. These children, their education, their opportunities, their futures, depended on her staying, on her continuing to show up every day and teach, even when it was hard. It should have felt overwhelming. Instead, it felt right. By the end of that first week, Evelyn was exhausted but satisfied. Friday evening, she came home to find Caleb and Luke working on expanding the barn. We're going to need more space, Caleb explained, planning to increase the herd next spring. Luke thinks we should also start breeding horses to sell. It's good money, Luke added, his face flushed with enthusiasm. And I'm good with horses. Everyone says so. Evelyn looked at this boy who'd been so hostile when she'd first arrived. He'd grown 3 inches in the past year, was filling out across the shoulders, and was starting to look more like his father every day. But more than that, he'd opened up. Started talking about the future instead of just surviving the present. I think it's a wonderful idea, she said. Luke's face lit up. Then, trying to sound casual, there's a girl at school, Sarah Henderson. Evelyn kept her expression neutral. Oh? She asked if I could teach her to ride better. Said her pa's too busy and she wants to learn. That's very thoughtful of you to offer to help. I didn't offer, she asked. But he was blushing now. Anyway, I said yes. Is that all right? Caleb made a sound that might have been a cough covering a laugh. That's perfectly fine, Evelyn said seriously. Sarah's a lovely girl, very responsible. Luke nodded, relieved, and quickly found an excuse to go check on something in the barn. After he left, Caleb shook his head. He's growing up. Yes. I'm not ready for that. Neither am I. but it's happening anyway. They stood together in the fading light, watching Luke move around the barn with the confidence of someone who'd found his place in the world. You gave him that too, Caleb said quietly. He was so angry when you arrived, so lost. Now look at him. He did the work himself. You showed him it was possible to heal, to trust again, to hope. Caleb turned to her. You showed all of us that. Winter came again, as brutal as the year before, but this time the house felt different, fuller, warmer, more like a home instead of a shelter. Christmas Eve arrived with fresh snow and a house full of smells, bread baking, meat roasting, Clara's attempt at cookies that were slightly burned but made with love. Luke had carved small wooden animals for his sister, a horse, a rabbit, a bird. Caleb had made Evelyn a shelf for her books, sanded smooth and fitted perfectly for the corner of their bedroom. Clara had drawn pictures for everyone, elaborate scenes of the ranch with stick figures that were clearly meant to be family. Evelyn had knitted scarves for each of them, her stitches still clumsy but improving. They weren't fancy gifts, but they were real, made with care and time and love. After dinner, after Clara had finally fallen asleep from exhaustion and excitement, Evelyn and Caleb sat by the fire while Luke read in the corner. This time last year, Caleb said quietly, I thought we'd just survive. Get through another winter. Keep going because stopping wasn't an option. And now? Now I'm not just surviving. We're living. Actually living. He took her hand. That's because of you. It's because of all of us. Maybe, but you started it. You came here and refused to give up, even when everything was hard and we weren't making it easy. You stayed. Evelyn leaned against his shoulder. Where else would I go? Back to Boston, somewhere easier, somewhere that made sense. This makes sense. It's just a different kind of sense than I knew before. Luke closed his book and stood up. I'm going to bed. See you in the morning. After he left, Caleb pulled Evelyn closer. I love you. I know I don't say it enough, but I do. I know, you show me every day. How? Fresh firewood before I wake up. Coffee made the way I like it, even though you think it's too weak. The way you listen when I talk about the students. 100 small things that say it louder than words ever could. They sat together in the firelight, not talking, just being. Outside, snow fell steadily, blanketing the world in white. Inside, the house was warm and safe. This was what home felt like, Evelyn realized. Not a place, not a building, but this feeling of belonging, of being needed and wanted, of having people who counted on you and who you could count on in return. The years that followed weren't easy. There were hard winters and dry summers, and years when the cattle prices dropped so low they barely broke even. Clara got sick with fever one terrible week when Evelyn thought she might lose her. Luke broke his arm falling from a horse and had to learn to do everything left-handed for months. But there were good times too. The school grew until Evelyn needed an assistant teacher, Sarah Henderson, who discovered she loved teaching almost as much as Evelyn did. Luke married Sarah when he turned 20, and they built a small house on the edge of the Grayson property. Clara became the best reader in the valley and talked about maybe going to school in Carson City someday, though she swore she'd come back. The ranch expanded. Caleb's horse breeding program became profitable. Other families settled in the valley, drawn by the school and the tight-knit community and the promise of a place where people looked out for each other. Red Hollow grew from a scattered settlement into a real town. They got a proper general store, a blacksmith, eventually even a small church that Evelyn rarely attended but was glad existed for those who needed it. And through it all, every winter morning for nearly 20 years, Caleb left fresh firewood outside their bedroom door before dawn. It was their ritual, his way of saying what he still struggled to put into words. One evening in late autumn, when the children were grown and gone and the house felt too quiet, Evelyn found a letter in the mail addressed in handwriting she didn't recognize. The return address was Boston. Inside was a newspaper clipping, an obituary. Thomas Whitmore, dead at 43 from a heart condition, survived by his wife and 3 children, remembered as a respected businessman. A note was attached in unfamiliar handwriting. Thought you should know. He spoke of you sometimes, said letting you go was his greatest regret. Evelyn read it twice, then handed it to Caleb. He scanned it quickly. How do you feel? Sad for him, for the life he had that sounds perfectly respectable and perfectly miserable. She took the letter back. And grateful. Grateful he broke our engagement. Grateful I was desperate enough to come here. Grateful for every hard choice that led me to this life instead of that one. Even the hard parts? Especially the hard parts. The hard parts made me strong enough to deserve this. Caleb pulled her close. They were both graying now, their bodies marked by years of physical labor, their faces lined with weather and worry and laughter. "I'm going to say something," he warned. "Something I should have said years ago." "All right." "That day you stepped off the stagecoach. I was angry. Didn't want some city woman in my house, disrupting the careful distance I'd built between myself and everything that hurt. Thought you'd last maybe a week before you ran back east. I remember you barely looked at me. Because looking at you scared me. You were so determined, so stubborn, so obviously going to be a problem." He smiled slightly. "Best problem I ever had. I thought you were the most impossible man I'd ever met. I was. You're still impossible sometimes. But you stayed anyway." I stayed anyway. They stood together on the porch, watching the sun set over land they'd worked for decades, land that had nearly broken them more times than they could count, but had also given them everything that mattered. In the distance, Luke's house showed lights in the windows. He and Sarah's children would be getting ready for bed, living the same hard, beautiful life their parents had chosen. Clara was in Carson City now, teaching at a school there, but she wrote every week. Her letters were full of plans to come home for the holidays, to bring her new husband to meet the family properly. The ranch was stable. The school was thriving. The community they'd fought so hard to protect had not just survived, but flourished. "Do you ever regret it?" Caleb asked. "Everything you gave up?" Evelyn thought about the girl she'd been, proper, constrained, living a life designed by others. Then she thought about the woman she'd become, strong, capable, essential. "Not once," she said. "Not for a single second." Years later, when someone asked Evelyn about her decision to come to Red Hollow, when had she known she'd made the right choice? She would think carefully before answering. Not that first terrible night in Caleb's house, feeling like an intruder in a family's grief. Not when the wolves circled or the rustlers attacked or any of the 100 disasters that had threatened to destroy everything they'd built. Not even on her wedding day, though that had been close. The moment she knew, truly knew, had been simpler than that. It was a Tuesday morning in her second spring, standing in front of her students in the completed schoolhouse. She'd been teaching them about geography, about the world beyond Nevada territory, about all the places they might someday go. And Luke, who'd been so hostile and defensive for months, had raised his hand and said, "But why would anyone want to leave here when we've got everything we need right here?" The other children had laughed, argued, pointed out all the reasons someone might want to see the ocean, or big cities, or anything beyond the valley they'd been born in. But Luke had been serious. "I'm not saying we shouldn't learn about other places, just that knowing about them makes me appreciate this more. We've got land and family and people who care. That's worth more than fancy buildings or whatever." And Clara had nodded, agreeing with her brother for maybe the first time ever. "Mama says home isn't where you're from, it's where you choose to be." Evelyn hadn't remembered saying that, but it was true, and hearing it reflected back to her by children who were becoming hers in every way that mattered. That was the moment she knew. She'd chosen right, chosen hard instead of easy, chosen real instead of respectable, chosen love that showed itself in actions over pretty words that meant nothing. On a cold morning in March, nearly 20 years after she'd first arrived, Evelyn stood at the window watching Caleb work with a difficult horse in the corral. He moved slower now, favored his left leg on cold days, but he was still strong, still stubborn, still hers. Clara was visiting, her first baby due in a few months. She sat at the kitchen table, reading through old lesson plans Evelyn had saved. "Were you scared?" Clara asked suddenly, "when you first came here, before you knew how it would turn out?" Evelyn considered the question. "Terrified. Every single day for the first 6 months. But you stayed." "I stayed because I didn't have anywhere else to go. Then I stayed because leaving would have been giving up. And then I stayed because I'd found something worth being afraid for." "What?" "All of this. Your father, you and Luke, the school, the community. A life that actually meant something instead of just looking like it should." Evelyn sat down across from her daughter. "Being scared doesn't mean you're doing something wrong. Sometimes it means you're doing something that matters." Clara touched her growing belly thoughtfully. I'm scared about the baby, about being a good mother. You will be. Not perfect. Nobody is. But good enough. And that's all any of us can be. Was my real mother perfect? It was a question Clara had never asked directly before. She'd been so young when Mary died, her memories more feeling than fact. No, Evelyn said honestly. She struggled with the isolation, got sad sometimes in ways your father didn't know how to help with. Made mistakes, same as anyone, but she loved you desperately, and she would have been so proud of the woman you've become. Do you think she'd be upset that Pa married you? I think she'd be grateful someone was here to love her family when she couldn't be. Clara's eyes filled with tears. I miss her, even though I barely remember her. I miss her. I know. That's natural. But I love you too. Is that wrong? Loving you when I should. Love isn't a limited resource. Evelyn took her hand. You can love your mother's memory and love me. Both are real. Both matter. They sat together while the morning light grew stronger and Caleb finished with the horse and came inside, stamping snow from his boots. He looked at his wife and daughter at the table, both with tears on their faces, and paused. Everything all right? Everything's perfect, Clara said, wiping her eyes and smiling. And it was. Not perfect in any traditional sense. There were still hard days and worried nights and problems that needed solving. But perfect in the way that mattered, real, honest, built on choices made deliberately, one day at a time. That evening, after Claire had gone to bed early and the house was quiet, Evelyn and Caleb sat on the porch despite the cold. It was their time, had been for years. The hour when they could talk or not talk, just be together without demands or distractions. You're thinking loud, Caleb observed. Evelyn smiled. Just remembering, that first winter, how impossible everything seemed. It was impossible. We survived anyway. We did more than survive. Yeah. He took her hand, his calloused fingers warm despite the cold. We built something good. A coyote called in the distance. Cattle shifted in the barn. The wind carried the smell of snow coming. If you could go back, Evelyn said quietly, and tell that angry, grieving man that the teacher from Boston would change everything, would you believe it? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. No. I'd think it was impossible. But it happened anyway. Best impossible thing that ever happened to me. He pulled her closer. Second best was you agreeing to stay. There was never really a choice. Not after the first few months. You and the children, you became necessary. I couldn't have left even if I'd wanted to. You wanted to sometimes. I could tell. Maybe. For about 5 minutes on the worst days. Then I'd remember why I stayed, and the wanting would pass. They sat in comfortable silence, watching stars appear one by one in the darkening sky. 20 years of these evenings, these quiet moments that added up to a life. Thank you, Caleb said finally. For what? For choosing this. For choosing us. For being stubborn enough to stay when everything was hard. Thank you for letting me. For making space in your broken family for someone who was just as broken. We fixed each other. No. We learned to live with the broken parts. That's different. Better, maybe. Caleb pulled her to her feet. Come on, it's getting cold. Let's go inside. But before they went in, Evelyn turned back for one last look at the land that had become home. The barn Caleb had expanded 3 times. The corral where Luke had learned to break horses. The path to the schoolhouse barely visible in the growing dark. All of it hard-won. All of it earned through choice and work, and refusing to give up when giving up would have been easier. A light appeared on the horizon. Luke's place. His children probably fighting bedtime the same way he'd once fought everything. The cycle continuing. The life they'd built extending into another generation. You know what I think about sometimes, Evelyn said. That stagecoach driver, the one who asked if I wanted to go back to Carson City. What about him? I wonder if he remembers me. If he ever thinks about the scared city woman he dropped in the middle of nowhere and wonders what happened to her. What would you tell him if you could? Evelyn smiled. That I found exactly what I needed. I just didn't know I needed it until I got here. They went inside together, closing the door on the cold night. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. It always did. But they'd face them the same way they'd faced everything else. Together. one day at a time, building something real out of choices that mattered. The last time Evelyn saw the original advertisement, yellowed and fragile, tucked into an old trunk, she almost laughed at how little it had actually told her. Teacher wanted, room and board, $40 monthly. Nothing about wolves or rustlers or brutal winters. Nothing about grieving widowers or hostile children or communities that needed saving. Nothing about finding family in the wreckage of broken lives. Nothing about love that showed itself through firewood and terrible coffee and quiet moments on cold porches. Nothing about becoming someone stronger than the girl who'd answered that advertisement out of desperation. But then, how could it have? The woman she'd become didn't exist until she'd made the choices that created her. On a bright summer afternoon, when Evelyn was 63 and Caleb was 67, a young woman appeared at the ranch. Fresh off the stagecoach from back east, eyes wide with fear and determination, carrying a single worn trunk. She'd answered an advertisement. Red Hollow needed a second teacher. The school had grown too large for Evelyn and Sarah to handle alone. Evelyn recognized that expression immediately. Desperation masked as courage. Running from something, hoping towards something else, with no real idea what she was getting into. "Miss Porter?" Evelyn asked gently. "Yes, I'm here about the teaching position." "Welcome to Red Hollow. I'm Evelyn Grayson. Come inside. You must be exhausted from the journey." The girl followed her into the house, looking around with the same overwhelmed expression Evelyn remembered wearing 2 decades ago. "Is it?" the girl started. "The advertisement said room and board, but I wasn't sure." "You'll stay with us until you find your own place. There's a room upstairs, simple but comfortable. I can pay—" "We'll discuss all that later. First, let's get you settled." As Evelyn showed the young teacher around, answering her nervous questions, she caught Caleb watching from the barn door. He raised an eyebrow. She smiled and shrugged. Later, after Miss Porter had been fed and shown her room and finally left alone to rest, Caleb found Evelyn on the porch. "You seeing yourself in that girl?" he asked. "Maybe a little." "Think she'll make it?" "I don't know. This life isn't for everyone." Evelyn watched the sun sink toward the mountains. "But if she's got the stubbornness to survive the first few months, she might surprise herself. Like someone else I know. Like someone else you know." They stood together in the fading light, gray-haired and weathered, marked by years of hard living and harder choices. But standing. Still here. Still together. And in the house behind them, a scared young woman lay in a narrow bed, staring at an unfamiliar ceiling, wondering if she'd made a terrible mistake coming here. Just like Evelyn had, 20 years ago. Just like Evelyn had, she'd wake up tomorrow and make a choice. To stay or to run. To fight or to surrender. To become someone new or to remain who she'd always been. The frontier didn't care which choice she made. It would be hard either way. But if she chose to stay, if she chose hard over easy, real over respectable, building over breaking, then maybe someday she'd stand on this same porch and understand what Evelyn had learned. That home isn't where you're from, it's where you choose to fight for. That family isn't just blood. It's who you show up for day after day, even when showing up is the hardest thing you've ever done. That sometimes the worst mistakes lead to the best lives, if you're brave enough to see them through. And that love, real love, isn't grand gestures and pretty words. It's firewood left outside your door before dawn. It's terrible coffee made just the way you like it. It's someone choosing you every single day in 100 small ways that add up to everything. Evelyn had thought she'd ruined her life the day she left Boston. Turned out she'd finally started living it.